With just 3 hours left before the zombie attack, I was reborn in the arms of a stranger. Kill me. I finally resigned myself to tell him, because that was our only hope for survival. The last button on my dress was undone when I suddenly opened my eyes and pushed him away. What's wrong? The man, half-dressed, was interrupted and looked at me quizzically with a raised eyebrow. What was wrong with me? I glanced at my phone. It was 11:53 p.m. I wiped the tears from the corner of my eyes. Feeling somewhat dazed, was it just a vivid nightmare fueled by alcohol, or had I really been bitten by a zombie, mutated, and then reborn? Wrapped tightly in the blanket, I shivered uncontrollably, unsure of how to respond to him. If you don't want to continue, I won't force you. Clearly uncomfortable, the man stood up and walked into the bathroom without saying much more, feeling woozy. I looked around the unfamiliar hotel room, trying hard to remember. That's right. Today I had caught my boyfriend cheating and decisively broke up with him. Later at night, I went to a bar alone to drown my sorrows. While tipsy, I noticed a man who stood out from the crowd as he left a private room. His clean-cut business attire seemed out of place in the garish, indulgent setting of the bar. That's when I set my sights on him. Why should I be faithful in love only to be betrayed? If that scumbag could hook up with a rich woman, why couldn't I attract a successful man? In a surge of drunken impulse, I threw myself at him. I knocked my throbbing head a few times, desperately trying to recall the nightmarish scenes that followed. In my memory, we did not continue our intimate encounter. Instead, I suddenly lost control of my emotions, clung to him, and sobbed out my grievances for a long time until I fell into a confused sleep. He indeed didn't take advantage of me. He just listened to my emotional outpouring for hours. Until a loud door slam woke me abruptly from his embrace. As soon as we turned on the light, we saw a blood-covered waiter collapse at the foot of our bed, his face as pale as paper, crying out in terror, "Zombies! There are zombies! They're eating people!" I looked at my phone in astonishment. It was 2:50 a.m. The soundproofing in the star-rated hotel was excellent, but at that moment, chilling roars and deafening banging on the door from outside scared me terribly. The most horrifying thing was, just as we had managed to get dressed, the waiter mutated. Suddenly, her eyes blood-red and ferocious, she lunged at me, biting the hand I used to push her away. The pain made me sweat instantly, and I screamed in agony as I desperately kicked at her, but she still tore a piece of flesh from my hand. "Are you all right?" The man rushed over and knocked the waiter to the ground, anxiously inquiring about my condition. Before I could speak, the waiter sprang up from the ground with unnatural speed, lunging towards the man who was closer to her. I could clearly see the flesh from my hand still hanging in her gaping, bloodied mouth. "Watch out!" I cried out in terror, and the man was tackled to the ground, struggling with the waiter. Despite my fear, I tried to get up to help him, but suddenly felt dizzy, and the wound burned intensely. Pain, like boiling oil coursing through my veins with my blood, made me scream madly. The last thing I remember was the man desperately breaking the waiter's neck, and then I frantically lunged at him. "I'll be going first. Your car is parked in front of the hotel. Feel free to call room service before you check out tomorrow. I'll cover the costs." The man's voice interrupted my recollections. I saw him already neatly dressed, his figure trim and austere, the epitome of restraint. I wanted to speak, but he had already picked up his suit and left through the door. Swallowing the words that almost slipped out, I sighed deeply. It was just a fleeting encounter fueled by alcohol. Why would he believe me if I told him that zombies were about to arrive? Even I couldn't be sure myself that the zombies would come in 3 hours. Yet, feeling terribly anxious, I quickly got up, washed up, grabbed my bag, and rushed home. What if those memories were real? Although the waiter had burst in at 2:50 a.m., that didn't mean the zombies outside would only appear then. I needed to get home as quickly as possible. While in the car, I called my roommate Chloe, who was still watching a midnight movie with her boyfriend celebrating their anniversary. I urged them to stop watching and come home immediately. Then, in the middle of the night, I could only go to a 24-hour convenience store, where I grabbed a lot of water, bread, instant noodles, and other daily necessities. I nearly cleared out several shelves, and the store clerk almost thought I was robbing the place. The streets were quiet in the early hours, and I reached the underground parking garage by 1:33 a.m. I called Chloe again. They said they were almost home, so I started moving stuff by myself, although I had carefully checked my surroundings and everything was dead quiet. A security guard zombie suddenly appeared and knocked me down as I was bending over to grab things from the trunk. The zombie, incredibly strong, bit directly into my throat. I didn't even have a chance to struggle. Blood choked my airways, and my screams abruptly ended. I could only desperately gasp for air, feeling like a fish pressed down on a cutting board. So zombies were real, and so was rebirth. Was the purpose of my rebirth just to be bitten by a zombie again? Suddenly, amidst hazy gasps, as I screamed and kicked the man who was bent over my neck away, I opened my eyes to find, damn, I had reborn back to my bed again. You're crazy. The man fell to the floor unprepared, his face contorting with pain and anger. I covered my neck, where he had left a hickey, feeling the heat and trembling of my skin. Sorry, I didn't mean to kick you, I hurriedly explained. Then, trembling, I checked my phone. 11:53 p.m. Indeed, I had been reborn again. If you don't want to continue, just say it. I won't force you. He seemed very angry but didn't continue to lash out at me. He stood up, his disheveled, strong physique particularly tempting. Unable to look him in the eye, I quickly turned around and explained, I was just killed by a zombie, and I've just come back. We don't have time to continue. We need to prepare some supplies and think of a way to survive. I spoke anxiously, hoping he would believe me. The man looked at me with a slight surprise and then smirked, turning to walk into the bathroom. It was clear he thought I was either an idiot or treating him like one. I'm serious. Zombies might be out there eating people right now. It's getting more dangerous by the minute, I explained loudly, but he closed the bathroom door without turning back, ignoring me completely. Hopelessly, I glanced at my phone again. 11:56 p.m. No point waiting if he didn't believe me. I couldn't afford to waste time. I quickly got dressed and left the house, calling Chloe to urgently come home. At that moment, everything outside was calm, with no news on the internet. It was the calm before the storm. After clearing out the shelves of the convenience store near my building entrance, I paid a delivery guy to bring the goods up using the elevator, and then I locked myself early at home. I was just a 25-year-old ordinary office worker. I'm no elite female warrior. How could I not be terrified facing those brutal, ferocious zombies? I hope that this time, we can stay safely at home and hold out until rescue arrives. After all, the zombie outbreak happened in the early hours when most people were asleep at home. Perhaps if we can hold on for a while, the military will be able to eliminate the infected. That's what I tell myself to find some comfort. But Chloe and her boyfriend Blake didn't come home early as usual. At 1:38 a.m., the door burst open, and there was Blake, biting into the back of Chloe's neck as they stumbled into the hallway. Scarlet, help, save me. Chloe's cream-colored coat was soaked with blood as she lay on the ground, desperately reaching out to me, her face a mess of tears and blood. I screamed like a madwoman and rushed forward, swinging a hammer I had found earlier, frantically smashing it down on Blake. I had no family left. Chloe was my only close friend. Since college, we had been inseparable, almost like sisters. Warm, bloody fluid mixed with some unidentifiable liquid splattered all over me. I felt like vomiting, wanted to hide in a corner and cry my eyes out, but I wanted to save Chloe more, even though I knew it was too late. Finally, Blake lay motionless on the floor, and my hands trembled uncontrollably as tears streamed down my face. But just as I thought it was over, Chloe suddenly leaped up from the ground and lunged at me with a ferocity far beyond any wild beast. Looking into the familiar yet estranged face of Chloe, I knew I had lost any chance of escape. The strength of a zombie was too much for an ordinary woman like me to withstand. Not wanting to be bitten, my mind went blank, and I ran to the balcony and jumped from the 6th floor. I thought jumping would be a swift end, but as my consciousness faded, I lay sprawled in the flower bed below, still unable to escape the hellish pain of my shattered body. Idiot, I really wasn't thinking. I'll never jump from a low floor again. When I opened my eyes again, the insane pain still lingered in my mind. I clung to the man beside me, shaking uncontrollably, unleashing all the screams I couldn't voice before I died in bed. You, the man looked up at me in astonishment, his eyes as clear and bright as obsidian, full of disbelief. He must have never encountered a woman who screamed so tragically in bed. Realizing what was happening, I covered my eyes with one hand, feeling the hot tears on my cheeks. I'm not assaulting you, am I? The man seemed unsure, cautiously moving away from me. I'm truly sorry. I know it's very uncomfortable for a man to be interrupted like this, but I had to. Sorry. It's not your fault. I have something urgent. I need to go. I pushed him aside and staggered into the bathroom to wash my face, trying to sober up completely. I wanted to survive, to save Chloe, not to resign myself to fate. I believe that being given a second chance at life must have a special purpose, not just to leave me caught between living and dying. Quickly getting ready to leave, I glanced back at the man standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows and offered a final friendly warning. The zombie virus outbreak is imminent. Go home quickly, stock up on food and drinks, and make sure you lock your doors. He looked back at me, frowning. I knew he wouldn't believe me and turned to leave, checking my phone. It was 12:08 a.m. This time I went straight to the cinema to find Chloe, dragging them desperately home. This time we managed to escape home with supplies in time, but zombies seemed to have particularly sharp hearing. Just a brief argument between Chloe and Blake attracted a zombie that banged on our door. As time went on, the sounds of doors slamming, windows breaking, and screams filled the building. I ran to the balcony and saw a man across the street, desperately running out of his bedroom holding his blood-covered child, shouting for help. Just as he opened his front door, a woman caught up to him and tackled him viciously. Some people, overwhelmed like me, jumped from their buildings, others screamed as they fled their homes, and some even grabbed knives to defend themselves against their once loved ones. Turned violent, more and more lights turned on, but the once cozy nights were replaced with horrific scenes of slaughter. It turned out that some had already been infected, and the person next to you might suddenly turn into a demonic mutant. What on earth was happening? How did these mutations occur? I couldn't figure it out. Then, a second and third zombie appeared at our door, even as we hid silently in the bedroom closet. The zombies outside banged against the door relentlessly like perpetual motion machines. Trembling, I checked my phone. It was 2:36 a.m. I realized that in my previous deaths, I had died too early to know that within an hour, the entire complex would turn into a zombie playground. The virus spread incredibly fast, and the zombies were unusually strong. Was there anywhere left safe in the city? Clutching a hammer, my heart turned to ice. Eventually, our security door was broken through, and the bedroom door couldn't withstand the blows either. We were annihilated. Opening my eyes again, I resolved to find Chloe, since the security door couldn't keep the zombies out. We decided to drive out of the city, hoping that other places might not have been affected by the virus. The first time we hit the road smoothly, but when passing through the neighboring county, we found the roads blocked by cars from an accident. As we tried to turn around and find another route, we were quickly surrounded by 5 or 6 zombies. Our car was overturned, and no one escaped. The last thing I saw was the time flashing on the car's display, 2:35 a.m. It turned out the virus had already spread to the neighboring county, and in considerable numbers. Next time, we continued to flee. I informed Chloe and the others about the zombie virus outbreak and strongly suggested, despite their initial skepticism, that we take a different route to a less populated countryside in hopes of finding refuge. But as we left a small supermarket at a gas station in the suburbs, we saw a zombie biting into a woman's throat just a few meters away under a streetlight. Blood splattering everywhere. They finally believed what I had said, and Chloe screamed in terror. The zombie, alarmed, growled and lunged at us. I was accidentally tripped by one of them, and Blake pulled Chloe and ran. Zombies bite the last person first. Let's run. Scarlett, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Chloe cried, looking back and apologizing, but she didn't stop running, even managing to carry 2 large bags of food with her. Though a zombie was formidable, the 3 of us could likely have overcome it together, but apparently, I wasn't worth their life-risking effort. How ridiculous. The close friend I persistently tried to save could abandon me at any moment. Such is human nature. I died again. Not just in body, but with an exceptionally cold heart, back in bed. I hugged my partner and cried hysterically for several minutes, mourning my tragic friendship, and then continued to flee amidst his astonished gaze. This time, I didn't seek out Chloe, but instead secured the presidential suite at the top floor of a building. I gathered a huge pile of supplies from the supermarket, telling the hotel staff I was planning a party the next day and that no one should enter without my call. I closed the heavy bronze doors of the presidential suite behind me. Gasping for breath, with only an hour or 2 to prepare, where could I go? Once out of the city, where would I find refuge? Remembering the zombies' terrifying strength and keen senses, I didn't expect the bronze doors to hold them off for long, and being trapped inside, I would inevitably run out of water and food. All I wanted was a quiet place to survive a few more days, gather more information, and organize my thoughts. At least I could plan and prepare better for the next escape. No longer flitting about like a headless fly, without guns and unable to purchase enough sleeping pills. Surviving is hard, and dying neatly is just as difficult. Each time being bitten to death felt like undergoing purgatory over and over, with despair and breakdown just a step away. That's why I chose a room on the top floor of the hotel, thinking that if I were cornered by zombies, jumping from the small balcony would be less painful. At 2 a.m., standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows and looking down, I could see more and more people desperately running in the streets. Cars collided in the distance, emitting eerie flames. The Star Hotel's windows were so well soundproofed that only a faint noise could be heard. Due to the pneumonia epidemic, the hotel's occupancy rate was not high, so for the first time, I cried myself to exhaustion and fell asleep, oblivious to the situation outside. Suddenly, there was a violent banging on the door, which made my scalp tighten. Miss Scarlett, please open the door. Please let us in. There are monsters outside. I had miscalculated. Hotel staff had access cards to use the private elevator to the top floor, and some knew I had stocked up on supplies, so it was no surprise they would flee here. I heard 2 beeps, signaling someone outside was using a MasterCard to unlock the door. but I had already locked the door from the inside and wedged it shut with the back of a chair. Gritting my teeth, I was torn inside. 5 or 6 minutes had passed. It seemed there were no bitten people outside. Should I let them in? If they kept knocking like that, they would eventually attract zombies, and I feared the bronze door wouldn't withstand an onslaught of so many zombies. Zombies are too ferocious. It's hard to survive alone. Should I try banding together for survival? Even if I lose, I'd have a chance to start over, so it's worth a try to save a few people. So, I gritted my teeth and removed the barricades, but just as I opened the door, the elevator doors also opened, and several zombies rushed out, clawing at the elevator doors. There was also a person lying in the elevator, bloodied and twisted beyond recognition. It was bad luck. My heart clenched. It was too late to close the door. 6 or 7 men and women outside screamed desperately, pushing open the door and leading in zombies like demons from hell. Save me, please. A waiter bitten on the ankle fell to the ground, desperately crying and clutching my legs, his fingertips digging into my flesh as painfully as being torn by zombies. Under the cold night wind on the balcony, I ultimately couldn't jump, and once again became a feast for the zombies. My flesh was torn apart, and just before closing my eyes, I watched myself being disemboweled. Damn the idea of banding together. I really brought this on myself. Despair and intense pain gradually devoured my sanity, and tightly closing my eyes couldn't escape the bloody and horrifying demonic faces. I could only madly resist in vain. No, get away, stop, what are you doing? A man's angry shout came. Yet again, there was the ambiguous light, the comfortable big bed, the faint aroma of alcohol mixed with the sweaty scent. Everything so enchantingly tempting. The man's face, however, looked terrible. He had several bloody marks on his face and exposed shoulders, which were shocking to see, but I'm back. Finally, I had returned from that terrifying place. Each time I felt myself sinking into hell, this man would appear. Seeing him, I knew the pain was over, at least the cycle of death was. Tears suddenly fell like a torrential downpour, quickly wetting the pillow beneath me. I couldn't help crying again, this time not wanting to stop. Ever, the anger on his face slowly faded, and he carefully let go of my hands, somewhat at a loss. Did I hurt you, or are you having second thoughts? I shook my head desperately, crying so hard I couldn't catch my breath. Forget it, if you don't want to, just say so. I won't. The man thought I was regretting and resisting fiercely, so he started to get dressed, thinking of leaving. In panic, I threw myself at him, clinging tightly around his waist, pleading, don't go. Stay with me, please stay with me. His strong heartbeat and the warmth of his body proved he was a real, living person, the only lifeline I could grasp as I was on the brink of collapse. Am I a fool? After all this turmoil, I haven't lived any longer. Actually, those first 3 hours I stayed by his side were the most peaceful. Indeed, just like the first time, he didn't leave. Instead, he leaned back against the headboard, spread his arms, and let me cry into his chest without minding the tears soaking his shirt. Even handing me tissues. Only when my crying subsided to sobbing did he speak, heartbroken. It's not worth it for such a man. I was slightly startled, taking another tissue from him. Before my first rebirth, he had said the same. That time, I had indeed been crying over a worthless man, but not now. After several cycles of life and death, some people had faded into insignificance, yet this man, whom I thought was a stranger, had become the object of my current desire. Yeah, you're right. But it's not about romance that I'm breaking down. He was right. It's not worth it for someone unworthy. Curled up in his arms, I greedily enjoyed this moment of peace, feeling very reassured. You looked really scared just now, he said. What if I told you I just had a terrible nightmare? Would you believe me? After wiping away my last tears, I looked up and noticed the scratches on his skin, bleeding slightly, and quickly apologized. He frowned lightly and said, it's just a scratch, but is sleeping with me what caused your nightmare? All right, it was me who indulged in alcohol and dragged him to this room, and then I had a nightmare while he was so involved. That must have felt incredibly insulting to him. No, it's not that. I'll explain in a moment. Let me get some medicine first. It was an awkward moment. I hurriedly dressed and called room service for antiseptic and other medical supplies. Then while applying the medicine, I detailed the cycles of rebirth I had just gone through. As I spoke, I tried to control my emotions, but my trembling hands, holding the cotton swab, betrayed my fear, perhaps fearing to trigger another breakdown. He didn't express disbelief this time. He listened quietly as I described my last moments being devoured by zombies. Then he picked up his phone. It was 1:19 a.m. You said at 2:50 a.m., a waiter will burst into our room, attracting zombies, and then you'll get bitten and turn into a zombie, and bite me. You've been through many cycles of rebirth, sometimes turning into a zombie, sometimes being killed outright, and each time you wake up at 11:53 a.m., he succinctly repeated the key points I had told him, and I nodded in agreement. When we entered the room, we were both drunk, went straight to the point, and even forgot to lock the door, which otherwise wouldn't have allowed the waiter to easily swipe and enter for help. The man got up, started browsing videos and checking the news on his phone. The internet still seemed calm, but after a quarter of an hour, looking out from the 30th floor window, we could see chaos starting to erupt on the streets. Videos and comments about zombie attacks began appearing online. The outbreak of the zombie virus quickly became a trending topic. My heart, which had barely calmed, clenched tightly again, and I unconsciously hugged my arms. It looks like this city is the epicenter of the virus, the man said gravely. At that moment, he had no choice but to believe. Indeed, I didn't know where the virus came from, but only after the outbreak in Pingmo City, where we were, did news of zombies start spreading online everywhere. It was clear that this area was among the first to experience the outbreak, and it was widespread, affecting the surrounding regions. He tried to make a call on his phone, but no one answered on the other end. Then, turning to me, he asked, "Why can you keep coming back to life?" I don't know. If I'm doomed, I'd rather die once and for all, than die horribly over and over again. I'm really going insane. I clasped my head, overwhelmed once again by the horrific images flooding my mind. If anyone says you get used to dying, or that you stop fearing pain after enough of it, I'd be profoundly grateful. I was both terrified and furious. What did I do to deserve this? Why has fate chosen me to endure this endless torment? After all, my boyfriend cheated on me, my best friend abandoned me, I might as well have gone to see my parents sooner. Why must I live through this bloody, terrifying apocalypse in such unbearable pain? Heaven must have given you these chances to come back for a reason. It shows you are unique, definitely important to this world. The man suddenly spoke, gently prying my hands apart. "Tell me, do you want to die or do you want to live?" he asked. I was startled, then looked up to see the seriousness in his eyes. "I want to live. I don't want to die again." I nodded emphatically. "Right, as long as there's a sliver of hope. Who would choose death?" "Good. Remember, my name is Ryan. I'm 29 years old, a lighting designer, and I run a lighting design company. My new cloud password, for 68169. When you see me next time, tell me these details straight away, and I'll take you to my friend's Nine Creeks villa for refuge." "Got it," he said solemnly. "A place of refuge." I was overjoyed, silently repeating the information until I had memorized it. Then I nodded vigorously. Then Ryan said, "There's no way out if we stay here. Let's go. We need to try more ways to survive." Yes, okay, maybe next time I would have a chance to survive, to escape the bone-deep despair and pain. Looking at the man before me, my will to live was reignited. At 2:03 a.m., we took the elevator down to the lobby, only to find it overrun. Waitstaff and passers-by were being bitten and torn at by zombies, their screams echoing amidst the shocking crimson all around. The light shining through the hotel's clear glass facade continuously attracted more zombies, their speed comparable to sprinters in a 100-meter dash. Upstairs, spotting zombies sprinting towards us, Ryan grabbed my hand and we dashed back towards the elevator. We had just risen half a floor when a thunderous bang sounded from the elevator doors below. The base of the elevator shook, and I gripped the handrail tightly, my heart skipping a beat. The strength and speed of these zombies mean that the chances of an ordinary person escaping them head-on are very slim. Listening to the zombies smashing through the elevator doors below and their eerie howls as they fell down the shaft, Ryan's expression grew grimmer, his body tensing up even more. Indeed, I felt that aside from a slightly longer mutation period, these zombies were only slightly less formidable than the strongest ones in World War Z. The virus has already spread outside. It's definitely tough to move on the ground now. However, there's a helipad on the hotel rooftop. Let's head up and see if we can wait for an aerial rescue. Ryan decisively made the decision, and I had no objections. Ryan's company was responsible for designing and installing the exterior lighting and the helipad of the hotel, so he led me straight to the rooftop entrance. However, the entrance was secured with an access control lock, and Ryan had to use a fire axe to break open the door. Soon after, panicked guests and staff began running up, eventually attracting the zombies. Everyone desperately held the door against the zombies, but the door couldn't withstand their frenzied battering, and eventually The rooftop also fell prey to the rampaging zombies. There was simply nowhere safe in the city. Ryan and I stood on the edge of the 35th floor, the lights of fires twinkling below us, screams tearing through the night sky. The cold night wind fluttered my skirt, making me shiver. I glanced at the time one last time. It was 2:46 a.m. The height here will make it less painful. Don't be afraid. I'm here with you. His warm palm pressed against the back of my head, his arms tightened around my waist. And my vision went dark as I was locked in Ryan's strong embrace. The roar of the zombies was inches away, with the chilling sweep of their claws brushing my bare legs, causing my hairs to stand on end. In the last moment, I tightly wrapped my arms around his waist and fell with him from the 100-meter-high building. The sound of wind rushed by my ears, my head dizzy from the lack of oxygen as I slipped into unconsciousness, but being tightly held in his embrace, I wasn't so scared anymore. This time, I didn't scream. A slight pain from a gentle bite on my neck and the faint, familiar scent of the man brought me back from my dizziness. Knowing he was now in high spirits, I really wanted to immerse myself further. But I couldn't delay any longer and had to push him away. Stop, get up first. But he seemed not to hear me, still trying to remove his last piece of clothing. To survive this time, I bit down hard and forcefully pushed him away with my knees. Ryan, stop and listen to me. He suddenly looked up at me, his face shifting from obsession to shock. How do you know my name? Ryan's gaze sharpened. I quickly grabbed the blanket to cover myself and hurriedly explained, I just came back from a rebirth after a zombie apocalypse. It was you in my past life who told me your name is Ryan. You're 29 years old, a lighting designer. You just changed your cloud password to 468169. You also said you would take me to Joshi Villa for refuge. Such jumbled information was obviously hard to accept, and Ryan was clearly shocked and confused. But time waits for no one. I got up to get dressed quickly. Don't just stand there. We need to leave. The zombie virus will spread soon. I'll explain in detail on the way. I checked my phone. It was 05 a.m. I really couldn't waste any more time. Picking up a coat from the floor and throwing it to him, I said anxiously, can we just pretend I want to change locations? I really don't want to be bitten to death by zombies over and over again. What's your name? He suddenly asked, staring at me. I'm Scarlett, 25 years old, a professional illustrator. I got heartbroken last night, so went to a bar to drown my sorrows. Then I saw you and thought you looked nice. So I approached you. I've died many times. Ryan finally accepted what I was saying. As he listened to me quickly recount the events, he got dressed neatly and was ready in no time. Your story is quite incredible, but I believe my password, which I just changed and wouldn't be known by anyone unless I told them myself. So for now, I'll trust you. Tell me, what do we do next? We need to get as far away from the city as possible, I said decisively. Before long, we were in his SUV parked outside the hotel, speeding along the normally quiet streets. The time was 12:20 a.m. I recounted my experiences of being reborn several times and summarized the characteristics of zombies again. Zombies are incredibly strong and fast. Once they charge, the impact is terrifying, and typical household security doors and windows can't stop them, I explained. Moreover, zombies have exceptionally sharp hearing and smell. The only way to kill them is to shoot them in the head. A slight bite or scratch from them can infect a human with the virus, which takes about 2 to 5 minutes to cause mutation. Zombies prioritize biting in crowded places. If there's no one else around, they might start devouring a person, I continued. Also, large, noisy groups are not suitable for survival, so it's best to avoid moving in teams. Nearby towns aren't safe either, and ordinary vehicles can't keep zombies out. These insights were bought with my own tragic and bloody experiences. Listening to me, Ryan looked serious. He first called his parents to make sure they were vacationing on an island and urged them not to return to the mainland. Then he called a friend and got through immediately, receiving a password. It turned out his friend was about to attend an important meeting, which is why he hadn't answered the phone last time. After hanging up, Ryan said, "The security at Joshi Villas is good. But the building has just been renovated. Except for electricity and water, there are no supplies. If we want to survive there, we'll need to bring everything: food, drink, clothing, everything." Since it was the middle of the night, there was no place to buy clothes or bedding, but we were close to my home, so we took a detour there. We arrived at my building at 12:42 a.m., moving quickly to avoid any zombies. Once inside, I quickly changed out of my dress into outdoor sportswear and running shoes, then packed up the bedding from my bed. Ryan efficiently filled a large suitcase with various necessities: laundry supplies, toilet paper, towels, a rice cooker, snacks, canned food, fruits, vitamin tablets. One suitcase was not enough. He eventually pulled out a bedsheet from the cupboard, using it as a wrapping cloth to make a big bag full of supplies. Seeing the capacity was enough, I also found a clean sheet in Chloe's room and packed my own clothes into another full bag, realizing there was no place prepared for Ryan's clothes. I also packed some of Blake's jackets and trousers, then we locked up and left. It was 1:06 a.m. when we drove out of the complex and headed to a 24-hour convenience store to raid for food and daily necessities. Ryan handed the clerk 30,000 yuan without waiting for each item to be scanned, just moving everything directly. We emptied the necessary shelves, even clearing out the storage room, until Ryan's large SUV was completely full. "You better close up and go home. Don't do business tonight," I advised the clerk, having already raided his store several times before. Just as we were leaving, I suddenly heard someone loudly calling me, "Scarlett," buying so much stuff in the middle of the night. I stopped and looked towards the voice. Under the streetlight nearby, there was Chloe, one arm hooked through Blake's, the other waving high at me. She held a large bouquet of roses, smiling happily, completely unaware of the fast-moving, stumbling shadow with one arm missing, rushing towards them from behind. "Watch out behind you, run!" My heart tightened, and I couldn't help but shout a warning to them. Chloe and Blake turned around in surprise to look. The man was merely 10 meters away from them, his ferocious and hideous face clearly visible under the streetlight. "Ah!" Chloe screamed in terror. Blake reacted quickly, grabbing Chloe and trying to run, but in high heels, Chloe couldn't run fast. In an instant, a zombie pounced on her ferociously, and her screams, accompanied by splattering blood, echoed through the street. Seeing this, Blake was so frightened that he let go of her hand and ran for his life. Meanwhile, the young man from the convenience store, hearing the commotion, rushed out without understanding the situation, attempting to help. "Don't go." My eyes welled up with tears as I quickly reached out to stop him, but the young man didn't heed me. "Get in the car." Ryan had already started the car and was shouting at me. As I saw Blake running towards us, I took one last look at Chloe, who was struggling in her last moments, clenched my teeth, turned around, and hurried into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut. "Scarlett, wait for me. Wait for me." In the rearview mirror, I saw the convenience store guy get tackled, and Blake nearly grabbed the rear car door but was thrown off as Ryan floored the accelerator. The face of terror and anger flashed by and then disappeared from the rearview mirror. I knew he wouldn't survive. It was a pity about the young man. In the end, I had abandoned them too. I closed my eyes, took a couple of deep breaths, and forced the tears back, clenching my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my flesh, causing pain. "Don't worry, I won't leave you behind," Ryan suddenly said. I turned to look at him. His expression was solemn, and I slowly relaxed my grip. The car's display glowed. 1:36 a.m. An emergency broadcast interrupted the radio. It was early morning, and the streets were nearly empty. The virus hadn't yet spread widely. Ryan drove fast, and soon we were out of the city. We sped along, passing car accident scenes without daring to stop for the cries for help. As we drove through a small town, a zombie suddenly charged at us head-on. "Run it over. Don't stop the car," I yelled, gripping the handle above the passenger seat tightly. I remembered the scenes where cars had been stopped only to be smashed and overturned by several zombies, which made me break out in a cold sweat. Ryan hesitated for only a moment before slamming down on the accelerator, with a loud bang. The zombie was flung away, and the front of the car was heavily dented. At the same time, another zombie suddenly leaped from an overturned car at the roadside, coming straight at us. Then another thud. The zombie's head shattered the passenger side window. The mixture of red and white fluids smeared across the window, and I had to bite my lip hard to keep from vomiting. Luckily, Ryan's car was sturdy. If it had been my economical sedan, the glass would have probably shattered instantly. But if we endured a few more hits like that, even the SUV wouldn't hold up. With their terrifying strength, these fearless zombies were a formidable force. More zombies appeared one after another ahead, but thankfully, Ryan's driving skills were excellent, and the road wasn't blocked. He calmly maneuvered the car in an S-shape, effectively reducing some of the impact and sending several zombies in the dark night flying away. It wasn't until we had completely shaken off the zombies chasing us that I finally let go of the handle, realizing my palms were sweaty. After about half an hour of driving, we smoothly made our way to the mountains, turning onto a small road amidst dense woods. Soon, we saw a fenced area of about 500 to 600 square meters in the forest, with a 3-story building in the middle. Kyle is a physics genius, specializing in quantum mechanics. Recently, he went abroad with a government group for an academic exchange. He enjoys the tranquility, so he insisted on building a house alone in the mountains. "Let's go inside first, and he'll contact me after his meeting is over," said Ryan as he opened the gate to the yard and drove the car into the garage. He took out his phone to check the time. It was already 3:25 a.m. We finally made it out of the city alive, and I couldn't help but sigh with relief. After getting out of the car and seeing the body of the car covered in dents and stained with blood, I felt a wave of fright. We entered the house through the small door in the garage and moved the supplies upstairs, trip by trip. The hard furnishings inside were already completed and cleaned. However, there were few pieces of furniture, and the whole house was empty, with some leftover decorating tools tossed in a corner. Fortunately, the kitchen and bathroom were fully equipped. After setting down our things, we first pulled down all the curtains and blinds on the first floor to check for security and to ensure no one outside could see inside. Then Ryan led me to the study, where he pressed a seemingly normal spot on the custom-built bookshelf, revealing a hidden keypad. I was amazed and widened my eyes. There was a secret mechanism. After entering the code, a row of bookshelves silently opened up to reveal a security door about 10 centimeters thick, with stairs leading downward behind it. Kyle likes to quietly work on his experiments, so the security is excellent. There's also a lab, storage, and a separate bathroom downstairs, though it's all empty now, Ryan explained, but the house's water and electricity can operate independently, and there's a satellite phone, radio, and full house surveillance video set up in the basement. The doors and windows are soundproofed and blast-resistant, so they should hold off a small number of zombies. Ryan showed me around, detailing the structure of the house. His phone rang at that moment, and Ryan quickly answered. "Kyle, we've arrived at Jiroshi Villa. How are things on your end?" "Ryan, I'm glad you're safe. The infection has been found abroad as well. I'm about to evacuate with the embassy staff and head back to the country to a secure base. I'll try to arrange a helicopter to rescue you guys once I'm back." Kyle's voice was breathless, clearly running and speaking urgently. Ryan quickly asked, "Do you know how the zombie virus started?" Kyle, being a nationally recognized physicist, might have access to information that others don't. It seems that the KB organization overseas released a biological virus in several major cities around the world at the same time. This primitive virus spread through water sources. After a certain period, people with susceptible constitutions begin to mutate and become poisoned. After mutation, the virus transitions to being spread through bodily fluids, infecting everyone. There is no vaccine yet, nor any immune individuals, so the situation is very severe. We need to prepare for a long battle. I need to handle some procedures. I'll contact you when I'm free," said Kyle, amidst a noisy backdrop. "Wait, let me ask one more thing. If a person could repeatedly resurrect at the same time and place after death, do you think that's possible?" "I remember you once mentioned a related theory," Ryan asked loudly. Hearing Ryan's words, my heart tightened and I listened intently. "Resurrection. The most likely scenario would be finding a time loophole coordinate to reset. That's exactly what I've been researching independently. No one has succeeded yet, but theoretically, it's possible." A lot of big shots laugh at me, saying I'm chasing fantasies. "Why do you suddenly ask?" Ryan glanced at me, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Just curious. When you have time, let's discuss it in detail," he said. Something stirred inside me. Was he trying to protect me, afraid that I would become an experimental subject? "Just curious." Kyle sounded puzzled over the phone. Then, amidst a burst of noise, someone shouted his name, urging him to hurry up with the procedures. "I'll get back to you as soon as I'm on the plane," Kyle yelled, then hung up. I let out the breath I had been holding. But then excitement surged through me. So, Ryan actually had such an incredible friend. Then what was all that about me repeatedly running out and getting devoured alive by zombies? No wonder he believed my sci-fi story of rebirth after I shared Ryan's personal information. It seems there was a reason fate brought me to him. Thank you, Ryan. Although Kyle said he wasn't successful just now, it doesn't mean he won't be in the future. Perhaps my rebirth was because of him, if we know the principle. There's hope for liberation. In short, I really don't want to go through death and back to life again. Of course, if I could keep living like this, that would be the best solution. At that moment, I finally felt that hope was limitless. We waited for Kyle to call again, but even by dawn, there was no ring. Ryan tried calling him, only to get a "cannot connect" message. My heart sank again, and I shared Ryan's worries. Had something happened to Kyle? As dawn broke, several zombies appeared outside the yard, constantly growling and violently hitting the gate and walls. Not good. Could it be that the car accidentally hit a person or an animal, leaving behind a trail of blood that attracted the zombies? Ryan and I had the same thought and hurried to the garage to check. Sure enough, we found a bloody black puppy corpse hooked in the gap of the dented rear bumper. It was too dark and rushed last night. None of us noticed. Just as we were about to clean up the corpse, the garage door suddenly made a loud bang and was dented in. Startled, I stumbled and fell to the ground, my heart clenched tightly, instantly unable to breathe. The zombies had entered the yard. "Run!" Ryan quickly picked up a steel spike from the ground and pulled me towards the small door of the garage. Bang, bang, bang. 1, 2, more and more dents appeared on the garage door, growing larger. We hurriedly shut the small door tightly, and Ryan grabbed a nearby paint can, splashing half a bucket of paint onto the door. We then heard a loud crash as the garage door was knocked down. Ryan pulled me along, running to the study on the other side. Seeing that the zombies hadn't attacked the small door, we finally dared to breathe a sigh of relief. We looked at each other, hearts pounding. We couldn't enter the garage, and with 7 or 8 zombies wandering in the yard, we were trapped. In the following days, we had to be extremely careful inside the house, fearing any noise might alert them. However, we still couldn't get in touch with Kyle. Days later, many cities had completely fallen. News reports indicated that the zombie virus was spreading outward from several major cities, with the military struggling to defend, steadily losing ground. The same disaster was unfolding worldwide. The zombies' combat and infection abilities were too strong. If the virus spread couldn't be controlled, it would soon be the end of humanity. Gradually, external communications networks broke down, the weather grew colder, and our spirits heavier. We've tried contacting various local emergency services through satellite phone, but none of the calls went through. The radio did announce the addresses and contact numbers of survivors' bases, but unfortunately, they were all far from us. Even after we managed to contact a base, they could only suggest that we find our own way there. From the sporadic radio broadcasts, we learned that one by one, the survivors' bases on land were being destroyed. Fortunately, the island base where Ryan's parents were located was still intact. However, later their mobile signal was lost, and we lost contact with them too. Ryan and I had considered escaping, but being in one of the regions where the virus originated, there were hardly any survivors left around us, not to mention any rescue options. Outside were only zombies with overwhelming strength, and getting trapped by them meant slim chances of survival. But what if we don't hear from Kyle? Our supplies will soon run out. Then what? This house is our fortress protecting us, but it's also a prison with nothing left inside. During this agonizing wait, the temperature in the mountains quickly dropped below 0. I only brought one set of bedding, which we spread on the solid wood floor of the study, each of us sleeping on one side. Initially, we slept distantly like the demilitarized zone, politely and clearly separated, but one morning when I woke up, I found myself curled up in Ryan's arms. He didn't push me away. Instead, he held me tighter, careful not to let the cold air seep in. Gradually, I got used to waking up in his arms, accustomed to his companionship in this cold, hopeless world. As time swiftly passed, we've been trapped here for 46 days, waking up in the morning and peering through the slit in the curtains. I saw heavy snow falling outside, the air was bone-chillingly cold, and I really didn't want to leave Ryan's warm embrace. We only have enough food for 2 or 3 more days, and Kyle probably won't call or send help. Ryan, kill me, let's start over. His body tensed noticeably. After a moment, I was pulled into his chest, feeling our heartbeats pounding louder and louder. You said you didn't want to die again. His voice low and slightly bitter. I looked up at him and smiled faintly. Yes, I'm afraid of pain. I don't want to die, but dying one more time is for a new hope. Don't worry, I brought painkillers from home. It won't hurt this time. I really dislike when the game level gets too high and having to restart from the beginner village, but being able to start over, isn't that also a kind of fortune? At this point, I'm thankful I can be reborn, starting everything over. Though, there's always a faint unease and regret in my heart. Because he will forget me, and won't remember any of these hard days we've spent together. Although we lie together, warming each other, he has never made a more intimate move, instead being somewhat cautious. But the more he does this, the more my heart flutters. I admit, I've become greedy, initially coveting his body, his looks, now I also covet his heart. But I'm really useless, having died so many times without any progress, unable to save our lives. Once we're reborn and successfully escape, I must confess to him. That's what I was thinking. Then shortly after getting up, due to the stress, my long-delayed period finally began. The noses of the zombies outside are much sharper than a dog's. Soon, they became agitated and swarmed toward the house, screeching and slamming into the glass and walls. Even more terrifying was that their howls could attract even more zombies, even if I hid in the sealed basement. The zombies outside didn't disperse, but at least they were less restless. When I go back after being reborn, contraceptives are essential. If that doesn't work out, tampons are better than sanitary pads. After rebirth, we need to outpace the spread of the zombie virus and head straight for the island base before it spreads completely. The dangers on the road are many, and the chances of survival outside are slim, but I still have a chance to fight. If it doesn't work out the first time, I'll keep trying, and if all else fails, I'll die and start over. In any case, I'm determined to fight until I can survive with him. I'm not afraid of dying again. I made up my mind quietly. Once I memorized all the information and escape routes from the radio and handed Ryan the steel spike, then, grabbing a handful of painkillers, I bravely said, taking too many painkillers will knock me out, just aim straight for my heart so I won't feel a thing, let's do this. Ryan's veins on the back of his hand bulged, his chest heaving more intensely than mine. As I was about to swallow the pills, my arm was suddenly yanked away. No, I can't kill you, I don't want to forget you, Scarlet, there's still a chance, let's wait, maybe we'll think of another way to escape. Maybe if we hold on a few more days Kyle might bring help. Ryan dropped the spike and gripped my shoulders, pinching them painfully. I opened my eyes in surprise, my heart beating wildly. Could it be that he might have feelings for me? Just then, the satellite phone in the basement suddenly rang. Could it be Kyle? We exchanged a glance of wild joy. Ryan snatched the pills from my hand and rushed to answer the phone, but after just a few words, the smile that had just appeared on Ryan's face froze. He looked at me, his eyes slowly reddening. All I knew was that it was Kyle's assistant on the line, and he said, "Kyle is dead, what happened?" I asked cautiously. After a while, as Ryan hung up the phone, he missed the first flight back to the country by just a step. He and a few other scientists from our country were kidnapped by local agents. It took our country more than a month to negotiate their return, but Kyle was attacked by zombies there on the way back. Ryan choked up and stopped. It was the first time I saw tears in his eyes. Once the zombie virus outbreak began, the veneer between nations was ripped apart. It seemed that scientists had become a valuable resource coveted by all countries in this apocalyptic world. Now, the apocalypse seemed to be a man-made disaster caused by everyone scrambling for resources. During his captivity, Kyle never stopped thinking about rescuing Ryan. His assistant called Ryan as soon as he escaped. I understood the pain Ryan felt losing his close friend. I stepped forward and rubbed his shoulder, comforting him. "Don't worry, we still have a chance. When I go back after being reborn, I'll have you call Kyle immediately. Tell him he must catch that first flight." Suddenly, Ryan hugged me tightly, so tightly I almost couldn't breathe. "Scarlet, you can't die. From the moment you survive 3 hours, you can't be reborn again. And neither can Kyle come back to life." Wow. I was utterly stunned. Owen has been working on projects with Kyle and is also an expert in quantum physics. Although he can't solve the difficulties of time reversal, his theories are clear. It was mentioned, he just said that the first time a person dies in reverse time rebirth is a critical node, if the time of the first death is linked to the point of rebirth to form a circle. No matter how many times the reborn person dies, and is reborn within this circle. And no matter what different events occur in between, the future remains unchanged. For example, if you are reborn about 3 hours before your first death, those 3 hours form a circle. As long as you die within those 3 hours, you will always be reborn at 11:53. Everything and everyone you've changed, including the whole world, will revert back to their original state. But now that you've lived past those 3 hours, you've stepped out of that circle and drawn a new timeline that didn't exist before, and you can't go back to that rebirth point. You've changed your own fate and that of others connected to you. This is a one-way straight line. Once it's broken, just like any ordinary person. Hearing Ryan explain this, it took me a while to grasp the reality. So, if I just endure those 3 hours, I would have broken the vicious cycle of life and death. But when I want to die, I can't. And when I need to be reborn, I can't come back to life. Should I be happy or despair? What should we do next? Owen said he'd tried to request help from the base. "Don't worry, we'll find a way to escape," Ryan said solemnly. I knew he was trying to comfort me. Now with severe shortages in manpower and firepower, and survivor bases continually being overrun by zombies, why would the authorities waste resources to rescue 2 insignificant people deep in a virus-infested area? If Owen's words were so effective, he wouldn't just say he'd try. Unless I report that I am a rebirth, would I then become a subject of experimentation, or once again a prisoner of time? The mere thought of not being able to control my own life or death made me shiver. If that were the case, I'd rather die. But thinking about the last few bags of instant noodles and snacks, I knew we couldn't wait any longer. "Maybe you should tell Owen about my rebirth. Perhaps the base will take it seriously and send help sooner," I suggested. If Kyle were still here, it might be worth considering, but he's gone, and all the scientific data was destroyed. If someone really takes an interest in your rebirth, they might use you as a subject for repeated experiments, and I can't let you be treated like a lab monkey. Ryan hugged me again, holding on for a long time. It's all my fault. If I hadn't held him up with endless questions that day, he could have made the first evacuation flight, and we could have escaped. Ryan's voice was filled with despair, my nose tingled with sadness. But how could I blame Ryan? It was because he wanted to ask Kyle about my rebirth that we were delayed. Now that Kyle is dead, the chance of me being reborn again might never come, and we are trapped here with only death awaiting us. With tears welling up in my eyes, I wrapped my arms around Ryan's waist and said softly, "It's not your fault. Kyle would definitely want you to live well. I don't want to drag Ryan down with me. If it could secure his chance of survival, I'm willing to make that call. Perhaps this is the meaning of my rebirth. At least I can save him, and there is still hope for us to live. Suddenly, I felt a cold sensation beneath me. I had a bad feeling, reached down, and touched. Just as I feared, my period had started. I had thought I might be reborn back. So I hadn't brought a new sanitary pad down. This time my period was delayed for quite a while, and when it came, it was unusually heavy. All I could do was blush and tell Ryan, who didn't hesitate to go fetch some things for me. As soon as we opened the sealed safety door of the basement, the zombies outside, visible through the surveillance cameras, became restless and started banging on the walls and windows. Damn it, this apocalypse is really unforgiving for women. I hurried into the small bathroom, locking the door tightly behind me. The basement was empty, devoid of any furniture, and the cold, icy floor was not suitable for sleeping. The upstairs, however, was relatively safe, and it was convenient to retreat to the basement in case of danger, so we had been sleeping on the solid wood floor of the study. No, I couldn't just give up. I had to continue finding ways to survive. On the days of my period, I dared not leave the basement. After Ryan brought me the sanitary products, he went to fetch the bedding and other necessities. Changing my underwear and sanitary pad wasn't enough. I also needed to change my thermal pants and quickly wash off the bloodstains. Ryan, I need to change my thermal pants too, I said awkwardly, knocking on the bathroom door. I'll gather the laundry, just stay inside. I'll wash the dirty clothes, don't worry about it, he said from outside before hurriedly running off. We only had 2 sets of thick clothes to change into, and I had just washed one set yesterday, because it was cold and damp, and we dared not open the curtains on the first floor. The clothes were hanging to dry in a south-facing room on the second floor. For now, I could only remove my blood-stained thermal pants, rinse them in the sink to dilute the blood, and shiver as I waited for him. Soon, I faintly heard a loud boom from the surveillance cameras outside. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly pulled on some cleaner outer pants and ran to check the monitors. The scene almost stopped my heart. The house's walls and windows were quite sturdy and the zombies hadn't gone completely berserk, so they were holding up. But to my horror, somehow a zombie had managed to climb onto the beautiful tiled roof of the small attic on the 3rd floor and had smashed a hole through it. It was now roaring as it charged downward. The world had gone mad. Our house, which had no burglar bars or anything that could aid zombies in climbing, somehow still had a zombie make it to the roof of the 3rd story. Seeing Ryan holding clothes and just coming downstairs, desperately running back, sent a cold sweat down my spine. I picked up a steel spike from the ground and ran to the stairs. At the basement door, I saw a small, fierce zombie lunging towards Ryan, who had just dashed into the study. As its filthy, sharp claws were raised high, my mind exploded in panic, and I screamed, "Ryan!" The zombie suddenly turned towards me, its deep red, murky eyes glaring menacingly, like a devil eyeing a blood feast. "Get back!" Ryan shouted at me, using the moment the zombie paused to rush forward and tackle it by the waist. Flipping it onto the ground, he was risking his life to save me. In that instant, I snapped back to reality. I saw Ryan, his arms wrapped in clothing to fend off the zombie's sharp teeth, his face flushed red, his jacket already torn in several places by the zombie's claws. The zombies outside were furiously banging on the window. Without a second thought, I rushed forward and plunged the spike into the zombie's head with all my might. Kill it, save Ryan. I was in a frenzy. 1 stab, 2 stabs, dark, filthy blood and yellow, foul-smelling brain matter splattered everywhere. Let's go. Ryan struggled to his feet, tightly gripping my arm. Only then did I snap out of my fear and madness. The glass continued to resound with thuds, and the frenzied howls of zombies outside were terrifyingly close. I hastily dragged the head-blasted zombie to a bookcase, hoping to mask our scent. Then Ryan pushed me into the room and staggered back a few steps himself. "Come on, get in here." I anxiously turned back to look at him. Ryan was gasping for breath, his body trembling, yet he stood frozen in place. Suddenly, it felt as if a needle had violently pierced my brain. I rushed to him, frantically wiping the blood that smeared his head and face. His pale face bore no wounds, neither did his neck, but when I tore open his tattered down jacket, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. His apricot sweater was ripped in several places, soaked in a glaring, fresh red. "It's all right, it's all right. Not all zombie scratches lead to infection," I said, shaking my head desperately, trying to suppress my uncontrollable sobs. He couldn't die, couldn't turn into a zombie. I hadn't even had the chance to tell him I liked him. Ryan's eyes were also red as he slowly lifted his right hand. The sight of a flesh-torn bite mark below his wrist shattered my last hope. I felt all strength drain from my body, the world around me turning bleak. "I'm sorry, Scarlett, I can't stay with you anymore. Call Owen. You must find a way to survive. Find my parents, take care of them. Go now." His once bright black eyes turned increasingly bloodshot. It seemed he had much more to say, yet no chance to say it. "Ryan, I like you. Don't leave me, Ryan." My vision blurred with tears. I held him tightly and refused to let go, but he pushed me ruthlessly, mercilessly, into the basement. Then the heavy door closed, sealing away all my hopes. At the same time, the sound of breaking glass came from outside. I tumbled down the stairs, pain piercing through my limbs. But I struggled to climb up step by step. He had promised never to leave me. It couldn't be. It's just death. I'm not afraid of dying, but I fear never seeing him again. The sound of heavy pounding came from outside the door, my tears unstoppable. My trembling hands struggled to press the door lock, but just as I was about to open the door, I stopped abruptly. No, I am a person capable of rebirth. I absolutely cannot give up. Wiping away my tears fiercely, I stumbled back to the basement. I needed to call Owen, tell him I could be reborn, get the base to send someone to rescue me. Although Kyle was gone, if other scientists knew there really was a person who could be reborn, they would surely study this direction and try to change history. So what if I had to be a lab monkey? What if the chances of success were slim? As long as there was even a slight hope, I must go back to save him. Finally getting hold of the satellite phone, I looked up at the camera monitor in the study and was instantly stunned. In the surveillance video, 6 or 7 ferocious zombies were smashing around a bookshelf, and there was Ryan, standing behind them with bloodshot eyes, completely ignored. I covered my mouth to stifle my sobs, but I couldn't hold back tears of joy. Persisting really did mean there was no insurmountable path. Then I saw him pick up a steel spike from the ground, forcefully plunging it into a zombie's head. One by one, the zombies fell, none resisting. Soon after, the basement door reopened. Ryan slowly came down, removing his ruined clothes to reveal many ragged and fierce wounds. His eyes still held a trace of bloodshot, but they were clear and bright. He smiled at me, showing his big white teeth, unbearably handsome. I rushed to him and held tightly to his still warm body. "I will never let go again." "Did I just hear someone say they like me?" Ryan said, holding me tight. I nodded desperately, but I was too choked up to speak. What a coincidence. I was just about to say, "I like you too." His gentle voice entered my ears, and my tears gushed out like a breached dam. Soon after, Owen received a call from Ryan and was ecstatic. 3 days later, the government sent a helicopter rescue team. The vaccine production technology was quite mature. The only thing missing was safe antibodies from immune individuals. There were immune individuals, but all were infectious. Only Ryan was not only immune with the necessary antibodies but also safe. With Ryan's blood as a culture medium, a zombie antibody vaccine was soon mass-produced. Armed with the antibodies, soldiers could freely move among and pursue zombies without fear of attack. Humanity finally launched a major counterattack, with Ryan hailed as a hero who saved humanity. 3 years later, the world announced the elimination of the last zombie. That day, Ryan and I went to Kyle's grave to lay flowers. "Brother, thank you. You are the real hero who saved the world." End of main text. Extra. That day, I drank too much and felt terrible. Ignoring the host's displeasure, I left the private room early. A fresh-faced girl suddenly appeared, shaking her head and asking me, "Hey, handsome, do you have a girlfriend? Her clean?" Straight black hair draped over her shoulders, her eyes red and swollen, clearly having cried for a long time, perhaps to drown her sorrows. "Please get out of my way." After a brief glance, I sidestepped her. She looked a bit hurt, bowed her head slightly, and staggered back without another word. For some reason, after walking a bit, I couldn't help but look back. I saw a man jokingly trying to chat her up. She tried to leave after rejecting him, but the man laughed and reached out to pull her, only to receive a slap from her. Seeing the man about to lose his temper, I suddenly felt very annoyed, stepped forward quickly, and pushed the man away. "I don't have a girlfriend. Would you come with me?" I said to her. Her eyes, red and blurry with tears, looked at me with surprise. Then she nodded frantically. It felt like I had picked up a pitiful little kitten. At that moment, I felt something tugging at my heartstrings. So, amid the man's cursing, I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and left the noisy bar. Initially, I just wanted to prevent her from getting into trouble or being taken advantage of by men, planning to be the good guy and take her home. But I think I overestimated myself, busy with work, and having not touched a woman since breaking up with my ex-girlfriend 4 years ago. Sitting in the car watching her curl up beside me, I suddenly felt an uncontrollable urge. Perhaps it was the indulgence of alcohol. Or maybe I had been single for too long. I couldn't stop myself. If she hadn't suddenly pushed me away, I really would have plunged in and not wanted to wake up. Later, the zombie crisis really did erupt, and I was glad I believed her words, allowing us to escape in time to the Joshi villa. I thought Kyle's connections would bring help soon, but he suddenly lost contact. That month was agonizing. I worried about Kyle and didn't know where hope lay for me and her. She never mentioned that night again. Sometimes I think, maybe I was just a momentary cure for her heartbreak. If it weren't for this zombie crisis, we might have each gone our separate ways, yet, it might also mark the beginning of our shared destiny. There's this inexplicable feeling, as if she has cried in my arms many times, and at times reacted with the startled ferocity of a wild kitten. Each time, I find myself moved by compassion and stirred by emotion for her. She lacks a sense of security and is timid, yet she is strong, she is emotional and has her own principles. Everything about her is so clear. I've realized I like such simple, straightforward girls. I can't help but want to protect her. However, in these apocalyptic times, I dare not promise to keep her safe, as I'm unsure of her feelings and hesitate to overstep. If we can escape safely, I would definitely tell her that I like her, even if it's the end of the world. I hope to be by her side till the end. Although I know she can be reborn, I don't want to see her suffer again, nor do I want these days together to be erased from my memory. Fortunately, she didn't take the medication, or I would have been driven to despair. After being bitten, it felt as if my body was thrown into boiling oil, torn apart in agony, driving me to the brink. I finally understand the pain she has endured time and again. I'm sorry. I can only protect her one last time, hoping she never has to endure such unbearable pain again. Glancing at my phone, it's 2:50 a.m., so I asked Owen, who after some thought, nodded solemnly. Perhaps in 10 or 20 years, other scientists might discover a method to change history, allowing us to bring Kyle back to life or even prevent the zombie apocalypse from occurring. As long as we persist, miracles can happen, right? Through Owen, I learned about finding the time coordinates that can reverse time and resurrect people. Akin to finding a needle in a haystack within the capacity of a supercomputer to create a highly complex antivirus program. Theoretically, any ordinary person can be reborn at these time coordinates, provided their body's magnetic field matches the loophole. Besides spatial coordinates, we cannot choose the time coordinates or the carrier, the person who can be reborn. Thus, if someone is reborn, it's not because they are special. They just happen to be the right carrier for those specific time coordinates. Then, I roughly figured out why Scarlett was reborn. The first time Scarlett bit me, my immune constitution allowed me to survive being bitten and thus live among the zombies after developing immunity. I would then call Kyle immediately to explain the situation and tell him the specifics and location, knowing I'm immune. He would definitely find someone to rescue me quickly and rush back to the country. Catching the first flight home, however, I might have had an accident later, not surviving until the rescue, while the zombie vaccine remained undeveloped. Eventually, Kyle found the time loophole coordinates set for that night at 11:53 p.m., with the spatial coordinates set to the hotel where I was. He intended for me to be the one reborn. It was a gamble, a matter of human fate, dependent on whether my body's magnetic field could match that moment. Clearly, I wasn't suitable, but fortunately, Scarlett, who was in my arms, had a body magnetic field suitable for rebirth at that moment, so she became the one who was reborn. That night, Scarlett finding me was fate arranged by the heavens. She was an angel sent by God. Now, looking at the woman sleeping sweetly beside me, the unfinished business of that night. We have a lifetime ahead to slowly settle. Story 2. I killed the original protagonist of this world, shattered her spirit spring space bracelet, and then, before he arrived, I cleanly and decisively slit my own throat. 1. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying on a soft, fragrant bed. I checked my phone, and the date displayed was August 5th, 2033. There were only 7 days left until the apocalypse began. 2. Laughter from a man and a woman echoed unreservedly from outside the bedroom. One was my boyfriend, Calvin, and the other was his close sister-like friend, Diana. It seems that heaven has indeed heard my prayers. 3. I got dressed, opened the door, and walked out to find leftovers on the dining table. They were cold, but that didn't matter. For a woman who had survived 8 years in an apocalyptic world, this was a supreme delicacy. After all, I had even gnawed on the corpses of my own kind. 4. Calvin, who had been embracing Diana, let go of her and gave me a sheepish glance as he moved away from the sofa. Eden, why eat this? Let's go out for a meal in a bit. I savored the taste of the roast duck, looking up at him. I've eaten enough to keep working. His handsome face put on a false, calculated smile. Clearly, Calvin hadn't understood my words. He leaned in close to my ear, trying to please me with a whisper. Remember that private restaurant you took me to last time? Today would be perfect to take Diana there. I had lost my appetite, but for the upcoming drama, I still finished the last 2 pieces of duck. Diana just snorted coldly, and Calvin immediately went to appease her. 5. Diana was beautiful, with a fragile allure that instinctively made people want to protect her. Just like that, I patiently watched the warm scene of a brother comforting his sister, a delicate and beautiful vine clinging to a man Stealing my boyfriend was just a petty trick in the apocalypse. 5 powerful men across 3 bases were madly infatuated with her. For her, Calvin took my last bottle of water and left me behind. For her, Cedric broke my right hand, rendering it useless with a knife. For her, Declan designed an impossible mission for me in the wilderness, blinding my left eye. For her, Dean crippled my meridians. For her, Damien slashed my face and threw me out among the men outside the base. In an apocalypse where ordinary people died screaming and helpless. You were born to be the heroine with a Spirit Spring space bracelet and 5 men to protect you. You were well fed and warmly dressed, always clean, even your hair smelled nice. Diana, how beautiful you are. You stood among the ordinary people, ragged and skeletal, with fresh corpses under your feet from just this morning. They were merely stiff, not yet foul. You cried pityingly, nearly gasping for breath, begging those men to save them. They all said you shouldn't have come. That you were too soft-hearted, kind, and naive. Yes, you were soft-hearted, kind, and naive, but why didn't you take out the materials piled up like 5 or 6 football fields in your space? You clearly had a pond-sized Spirit Spring in your space, so why did you still manipulate Calvin to steal my last bottle of water? 6. Eden, did you hear me? Seeing me staring at Diana, Calvin asked somewhat angrily. I looked at him. That bracelet you bought yesterday at the stall, give it to Diana. Why should I give her my things? What happened in my past life? I can't quite remember. As Diana started to cry and whine again, Calvin grew even angrier. While he frantically comforted his dear sister, he yelled at me, "What are you saying? Diana is my sister after all. That bracelet is only 20,000 yuan. Consider it a welcoming gift from your sister-in-law to Diana." Oh, now I remember, in my past life, how deeply I loved this man before me. Whenever Calvin got angry, I would hurriedly take out the bracelet and compensate with several luxury bags, and that limited edition haute couture white dress Diana is wearing now. That's mine too, living in my house, using my things, sleeping with my man, not bad at all. Diana, I opened a bottle of cola for myself. It's been a long time since I drank something so intoxicating. Who would have thought that in 7 days, all of humanity's achievements would be destroyed in an instant, brother? Don't speak so loudly to Sister Eden. Even though I saw the bracelet first, Diana nestled in Calvin's arms, looking up at him shyly and timidly. Her voice was sweet, with a fragile hint of crying. That last hesitant statement, as if she was accusing me of stealing her stuff. I smiled faintly. Okay, I'll go get it for you. Calvin wanted to say something else, but was stopped by Diana. I put down the cola and went back to get the bracelet. Calvin was gazing into Diana's misty eyes, filled with infatuation, while the faucet in the washbasin was running full blast, unnoticed by anyone. Turn off the water. I burst their romantic bubble. If I hadn't come out, they would probably have kissed by now. Calvin looked at me impatiently, annoyed that I disrupted his moment. Oh, it seems he forgot that he is still technically my boyfriend. I took out the bracelet. Diana tried to control herself, but her eyes inevitably showed a spark of excitement. Could it be that she already knew the secret of the bracelet? Wanted, in our past lives, you used my love for Calvin to deceitfully take my bracelet, ensuring a smooth life for yourself. I wasn't going to hold a grudge, but you shouldn't have tormented me, yet not killed me. I put the bracelet on my own wrist and taunted her, not giving it to you. Diana's body swayed, and she cried, seeking Calvin's help. If you want it, come and get it yourself. Just a clinging vine, without a man. Who could you rely on? Hearing my provocative words, Calvin came over to defend Diana. What nonsense are you talking about? Give the bracelet to Diana, or we're breaking up. He's an athlete, nearly 6 feet 3 inches tall, and looks even more intimidating when angry. He spread his hands towards me, large as fans. If it were me at 19, weak and powerless, I'd be trembling with fear. I stepped back, sat on the sofa, and while reaching under it, I responded. Your dear sister seems eager to take over, isn't she? I found it. Calvin quickly looked back, saw Diana's tearful, aggrieved face, and started scolding me. Don't insult Diana. Me, insulting her. Oh right, Diana had strung along many guys, with Calvin being the first to follow her but the last she slept with. So now, in Calvin's eyes, Diana remains a pure and virtuous little sister, maintaining the facade of siblings. After having had enough, right now. I took the baseball bat from under the sofa and swung it hard at Calvin's wrist. With a crisp snap, Calvin howled in pain, clutching his broken wrist and staring at me in terror, his eyes wide as if he were looking at a vengeful ghost. Indeed, I was like a ghost freshly emerged from hell, one that even the king of hell wouldn't take in, sending me back to the mortal world to collect debts. How could I let this opportunity pass? You crazy woman, have you lost your mind? He staggered back, and Diana behind him screamed in fright before he looked back. When will they ever learn? I swung the baseball bat again, leaping up to strike him on the back of his head. He fell to the ground, convulsing, and then I grabbed a chair nearby and smashed it down on him, silencing him completely. What a rush. I wonder if Cedric felt this exhilarated when he broke my right hand back then. I picked up the baseball bat again and walked towards Diana, who leaned against the wall, looking pitifully vulnerable. Please, don't kill me. Her voice was so soft, her face so tempting, and her eyes so alluring. I dropped the baseball bat, cupped her delicate face in my hands, and leaned in to look closer. How could anyone have such beautiful eyes? Diana's soft hands clung to my arm. She sobbed quietly, Sister, it's my fault. I shouldn't have coveted what belonged to you. I'll listen to everything you say from now on, just please don't kill me. I tenderly wiped the tears from her face, full of admiration. Our Diana, you're truly beautiful. I pretended to remove a bracelet. If you want this bracelet, Sister will give it to you. A flicker of greed passed through Diana's eyes, her throat bobbed twice, but she timidly refused. TSK, if you don't like the bracelet, how about I give you a better gift? I feigned disappointment, shaking my head, then paused to think. Seeing her curiosity, I told her to close her eyes. This gift will be even more precious than the bracelet. Diana closed her eyes, and I held her hand, stroking it, so smooth and tender. I neatly placed her hand on her knee, spread out. Good children shouldn't open their eyes. I pulled out a small knife from behind me, the blade's gleam reflecting on her eyelids. She opened her eyes. I slashed her face forcefully, cutting deep to the bone. Bad children who open their eyes will be punished. A second later, blood surged from her wound, and the pain twisted her lovely face into a grimace, producing a scream sharper than Calvin's death cry, nearly deafening me. SHH, don't wake the neighbors. I covered her mouth, smiling as we made eye contact. Even though this is the detached villa my mother bought for me, ghost, you're a ghost. How can you call me a ghost when you, covered in blood, look much more like one? I let her go, watching as she stumbled towards the sink. Turning on the faucet to wash the blood off her face and check her wound, I locked the front door, then walked over it and turned off the tap. How many times have I said to conserve water, and yet you never remember? I led Diana by the hand to the basement. Wasting water resources will be punished. I tied her up, satisfied with my handiwork. I then dragged Calvin's body in, still barely alive, more a half-corpse really, heavy, but at least not cold. Diana, terrified, asked me. Just because of a bracelet, you want to kill us? I waved my hands hurriedly, trying to clear the misunderstanding. How could I possibly kill you, after tormenting me for 8 long years? How could I let you die so easily? I looked at her blood-covered face with keen interest. The tender, red flesh underneath was turned inside out, making it look utterly horrifying. With your face ruined like this, how are you going to seduce men into dying for you? Diana, our story is just beginning. With those words, I shut the door of the basement. The apocalypse would arrive in 7 days. I turned off the TV and air conditioning, stepped out of the house, and walked among the crowd under the scorching sun. I watched as parents played with their children outside, young men and women sat opposite each other enjoying Western meals, and cars flowed in their respective directions. Everything in the human world was orderly. No one would have guessed that starting tomorrow, temperatures would rise to between 40 and 45 degrees, eventually reaching 50 degrees. On the 4th day, it began to rain, a continuous downpour lasting 32 hours, submerging 70% of the country. On the evening of the 5th day, all animals began to mate frantically, reproducing. On the 6th day, the temperature returned to a normal 28 degrees, suitable for living beings. The receding floodwaters, filled with the corpses of various dead animals, were perfect for breeding flies and insects. Humanity celebrated. The whole city was brightly lit, and the streets were crowded. They celebrated rebirth, until the stroke of midnight. They came. On the 7th day, the world ruled by humans was overturned, and the warm human bodies became nourishment for parasites. I ordered a vegetarian meal. As there were no ordinary vegetables left for humans to eat in the apocalypse, many large animals had gone extinct, but not plants. Plants had mutated into deadly weapons. I remember the 3,000-year-old ginkgo tree at the temple my parents took me to when I was a child. In the 3rd year of the apocalypse, its roots had taken over the entire city. The ancient tree believed in the Buddhist principle of equality for all beings, whether human or animal, mutated or ordinary. All were tightly grasped by its roots, turned into nutrients. This place became a forbidden zone, splitting the nation in two. and until the year I died, no one could cross it. I couldn't change everyone's fate, but I still found an internet cafe and wrote down most of the future events, signing it as "Those who believe me, survive." At first, it always made people laugh. Some even asked if I was writing a novel, but after the temperature started to rise the next day, some believed and began to stock up. On the third day, as the temperature continued to rise, volcanoes erupted on the Japanese islands, sinking the entire island. My post quickly rose to the top. Everyone finally understood this was not a novel, but a prophecy from someone reborn. On the night of the third day, masses fled the cities. Those who couldn't escape climbed high buildings, even mountaintops. Then it started to rain. Those on the mountaintops watched as a swarm of flies and mosquitoes killed an elephant. When the rain stopped, they cut open the elephant's skin. Underneath were wriggling larvae, densely packed into the flesh. This video went viral across the internet. Some people saved themselves, others waited for him to save them. Our beloved protagonist Diana, on the night of the third day, was rescued by the military from the basement. More precisely, she was carried out in the arms of the team leader, Declan. This life, you two met almost half a year earlier than planned, but it's pretty much the same scenario as your past life, just the typical hero saving the beauty trope. The delicate girl in a white dress adorned with bright red flowers, a scar on her face, tears in her eyes, and her damp lashes fluttering like butterfly wings, her hands draped around the neck of a man whose face was stern but whose eyes betrayed his tenderness. Resting gently against his chest, Calvin was being carried by 4 men, unconscious. TSK, such a pity there's no white cloth covering his head. I turned off the camera at the main gate, grabbed a chainsaw, and stayed overnight in the temple. I disguised myself a bit and went to cut down the tree in the dead of night. The monks were all there, sitting around the ginkgo tree in a circle. They chanted with wooden fish. The young monk opened his eyes and nudged the senior monk. The senior monk, with the young monk, bowed to me. All conditioned phenomena. I interrupted him. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in Buddha, nor people. I only believe in myself. You are a savior. I shook my head and pulled out the chainsaw from behind me. I'm not here to save the world. This is purely personal. When Declan sent me here to complete the task, a fool tried to save me and got swallowed by the tree. The senior monk tried to stop me. I've killed many, but they all deserved to die. If you try to stop me from cutting down this tree today, then I'll have to cut you down as well. I switched on the chainsaw, and it buzzed noisily. The senior monk was silent for a long time until the young monk handed him an axe. The young monk said, "If you hadn't come, we were prepared to cut it down ourselves." The senior monk took the axe, looking up at the ancient tree he had watched grow from sapling to giant. Finally, he closed his eyes, wiped away tears, and chopped down with the axe. The surrounding young monks also pulled out their axes and began to chop. By dawn, I made the final cut. This ancient tree, which had stood in the temple for 3,000 years, fell and destroyed the golden statues of Buddha and Bodhisattvas. The senior monk said, "From now on, this temple no longer exists." I had no interest in their mournful reflections. It was time to move on to the next place. On the 6th day, I returned to the city. The city's population had greatly diminished. The streets were filled with military personnel. They protected the city with an electrical grid in the sky. But what about underground, in the rivers? Nobody knew. But overall, this time, there were fewer deaths than last time. I opened the curtains and saw the streets covered with carcasses swarmed by fist-sized flies. I'd still be having nightmares about this 4 or 5 years later. The only consolation was their short lifespan. I went to a small villa in the city center and knocked on the door. A half-naked man opened the door, his face beautiful like a poppy, with eyes like peach blossoms. They filled with joy upon seeing me. I smiled sweetly at him. "Cedric, brother, I'm back." Cedric pulled me into his arms and held me tight. I could feel his heart beating wildly and the faint scent of his shower lingering. He was 5 years older than me, and we grew up together. He gave me everything I wanted. But that day, he said to me, "Eden, you can't compete with Diana." "I'm sorry, then." He broke my right hand himself. I lay on the ground, watching his figure fade away. My childhood friend, my brother, my adversary. "Did you see the prophecy online? Things are so chaotic outside. You should stay." Cedric put on his clothes and poured me a cup of hot water. I nodded and smiled as I took it from him. Of course, I wouldn't leave. After all, you're still alive and well. After my shower, my hair casually draped over my shoulders, I slipped into Cedric's clothes, rolled up the sleeves a few times, but they still hung loosely. The oversized collar revealed my pretty collarbones, and with a slight movement, half of my delicate shoulder was exposed. I smiled at my reflection in the mirror, squinting my eyes. Truly tempting. Cedric had prepared a table full of homemade dishes, including my favorite sweet and sour carp and spicy diced chicken, along with 3 or 4 other dishes. He served me a piece of fish, encouraging me to taste it. Delicious. He served me another helping with his chopsticks, not eating himself, but watching me intently. Eden, did you break up with him? Yes, I continued eating the spicy diced chicken, perhaps the last dinner before the apocalypse. Why didn't he cherish it? Cedric, somewhat agitated, knocked his chopsticks onto the bowl, then awkwardly bent down to pick them up. Could it be that he likes me, yet hurts me? Truly nauseating. I set down my chopsticks. He seemed at a loss. Eden, why aren't you eating? I was about to say I was full, but then I changed my mind. I thought of something more amusing. It's spicy. I stuck out my tongue and panted, gesturing for him to pour me a glass of water. I gulped down the water too quickly, causing it to dribble from the corner of my mouth down to my collarbone, then slipping into my neckline. I didn't miss how his eyes darkened, his Adam's apple bobbing unconsciously. He handed me 2 napkins. I didn't take them, slowly saying, "You wipe it." After a moment, just as I was about to take them from him, he suddenly withdrew his hand. All right. Cedric knelt before me, devoutly wiping the droplets of water from the corner of my mouth, his fingertips grazing my face. I could feel the excessive heat from his body. Eden, his voice had become hoarse at some point. His expression was like a wolf yearning for food, but not daring to act without its master's command. I am here. I lowered my head, seeing my own face reflected in his pupils, a seductive enchantress, his hand pressed against the back of my neck. Then he kissed me. At first, I could feel his fear, hesitant to make any bold moves, as if afraid I would reject him. I closed my eyes, placing my hands on his shoulders. After the kiss, it was he who was breathless, his face flushed. He held my hand tightly against his heart. "Eden, I love you." I laughed. "Who asked for your love?" Imitating Diana, I wrapped my arms around his neck. "Cedric, will you protect me?" "I will protect Eden for a lifetime." Cedric scooped me up and walked towards the room. He truly was a greedy wolf. I leaned against him, innocently looking up. If Big Brother Cedric fails, there will be a punishment, you know. He shut the door with his elbow, then gently placed me on the bed, pressing against my forehead as he solemnly replied, "If that day comes, no matter what punishment Eden gives me, I'll accept it." I couldn't help but laugh joyously. It was so amusing. Wearing the heroine's bracelet, acting like the heroine, and even sleeping with the heroine's man. But then, Diana does like picking up after me, doesn't she? It's a deal. I kissed him willingly. I was already looking forward to the day I'd see Diana again. 26, men, such annoying creatures. After a whole night of fuss, he wouldn't even let me out of bed, clinging like a dog, constantly professing his liking, his love. Loved me since we were little. I'm terrified it's all a dream. But dying in this beautiful dream would be worth it. He endlessly brought up tales of me following him around as a child. I denied his kiss, pushing him away to the bathroom. Tomorrow, the water will be cut off. 2 continuous days of rain had already severely polluted the water supply. I wore his shirt, which barely covered the bite marks on my thighs. I pulled open the living room curtains, looking out towards the distant street. 27, the 7th day. Thankfully, I didn't see the kind of scene from my past life, with streets filled with corpses and flies. There were still a few human bodies, scattered here and there, holding liquor bottles. Seems they were enjoying the apocalypse's last revelry. Good words failed to persuade the damned. My gaze then shifted to the opposite high-rise. Every household had locked their doors and windows, though occasionally, someone looked out just like me, vomiting, screaming, collapsing in shock. Oh, and 2 people jumped from the building, only to be swarmed by flies midair. A pair of hands covered my eyes, pulling the curtains shut, holding me. "Don't be afraid," I said. "I'm not afraid." "But you're trembling." "It's excitement." Cedric still doesn't understand what apocalypse means. 28. In one night, the bodies of the 2 who jumped were covered in dense flies, as big as fists. They began to mutate. I misspoke. For animals, this is called evolution. It took humans tens of thousands of years to reach today. But these insects just needed one night to topple what took humanity tens of thousands of years to build. The laws of nature are truly marvelous. I couldn't help but marvel. Then looked towards Cedric. Quite shocking, right? And this is just the beginning. All my experience was paid for with the blood and lives of countless humans. I gave it back to humanity without asking for anything in return. Unfortunately, the government censored the article I published afterward. They told the public it was just an insect plague, a disease. Once the military kills all these insects and disinfects the city, everything will be back to normal. The world ruled by humans will return. Thinking back, if I knew all this while I was still a sophomore, I wouldn't have had the will to live. When the truth is obscured, what we see is a simple, beautiful wish. 29. The water stopped, and I asked Cedric, feeling aggrieved, "Brother Cedric, what should we do if there's no more water?" Cedric held me and gently stroked my head to comfort me. "Don't worry, Eden, I have saved some water. If we use it sparingly, it should last us for a week." He loved holding me tightly, treating me as if I were a delicate doll, afraid that I might break or be taken away. I traced circles on his chest with my fingertips. "But I want to take a bath." He paused for a moment, then smiled and held my hand. "No problem, Eden. Go ahead and bathe if you want to." After my bath, I found him too dirty and refused to let him hold me. That night, I slept alone in a separate room, only for him to insistently join me in bed. "Eden, I'm not dirty, really. Can't we stay together?" He whispered in my ear while kissing me. "In a few days, when the bugs are gone, let's get married." "Okay, Eden, I want us to be together forever." "Eden won't stay with you. It's your Diana who will be with you forever." I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. This is really annoying. This game needs to end. Someone opened the door, stepped onto the street, and was immediately engulfed by swarms of insects, collapsing soon after. The hoped-for military assistance never arrived. No water, no internet. Luckily, Cedric's little villa had its own generator, and the large kitchen on the first floor had natural gas. Unfortunately, this 400-plus square meter place had barely half a basin of water left, which wouldn't last more than 2 days even with careful use. I accidentally knocked over the last bit of water, spilling it all over the pristine floor tiles. This is what they call spilt water cannot be retrieved. Quite the cultured phrase I used. The basin clattered noisily across the floor. I heard Cedric's frantic footsteps. "Eden, did you fall?" he called out before he even arrived. He pushed open the kitchen door, saw the nearly dried-up water on the floor, the empty basin, and me, the culprit, standing beside it. I looked at him, calmly waiting for his anger to erupt. He rushed over and scooped me up. "The floor is slippery. Don't move around," I said. I spilled the water. He carried me to the living room. I saw. "And then, Cedric, what now? What are you pretending? Are you hopelessly in love with me? We have no water to drink. What should we do?" I questioned him, my tone devoid of any remorse. "Aren't you angry, Cedric? This neighborhood was developed by me. I had installed a water reservoir near the central flower beds for watering the plants. I know where the switch is. Can you wait one more day, Eden? Tomorrow morning, we'll have water, I promise," Cedric said with a confident and gentle tone, strong yet vulnerable. How could there be such a deadly contrast? His beautiful, thin lips cracked and bled, making his face look even more striking. "Really? That's great." I happily pressed my lips against his. What a fool. With all those insects outside, getting entangled with them spells doom. Even if you manage to bring back the water, all the water outside is already undrinkable because it's filled with insect eggs. But do I care about that, Cedric? You're doomed, after one last indulgence of his relentless demands. I drifted into a deep sleep. He tucked me in and kissed my forehead, whispering softly, "Eden, I love you, although I'm tired of this, but I think this is the last time I'll hear it." I heard him pick up the bucket and quietly walk out the door. In my groggy state, a violent chorus of insect chirping erupted outside. I abruptly sat up, eyes wide open, looking toward the window. Unfortunately, the thick curtains blocked my view. I couldn't see anything. I was so tired, too lazy to get out of bed. So I just lay back down on my pillow and continued to sleep. Cedric must be dead by now. For someone who loved cleanliness, it's ironic that his corpse became a breeding ground for flies and insects, dirtier than the filthiest cesspit. I woke up and opened the front door. There was Cedric, perfectly fine, sitting on the sofa. I paused in my tracks. Oh, he's not dead yet. When he saw me come out, he hid his right hand behind his back and then, with a flattering gesture, pointed to the 2 full buckets of water in the middle of the living room. "Eden, look, what luck." Not only did he manage to carry 2 buckets of water without spilling, but the water was also clear to the bottom, miraculously free of insect eggs. "It looks like the game must go on." I laughed and threw myself into his arms, but before I could speak, I heard him sharply inhale as I pushed him down on the sofa. He helped me up and then stood a bit away from me. "Eden, I've noticed that these insects are less active at night. It seems they also sleep. Take off your clothes." Cedric's face was pale, but he continued to speak with a smile. "I'll go out early tonight to fetch more water. Keep it safe until the army arrives." I said, "Take off your clothes." I was really angry. It was annoying enough that he wouldn't listen. He reached out to hug me, but stepped back instead. "Eden, please do as I say." I saw the wound on his hand and asked bluntly, "Were you bitten?" Cedric stiffened, and with a grim smile, said, "I cut open the wound on my hand to remove the insect eggs, but there are too many on my back, and I was afraid of waking you." I stepped forward, grabbed his arm, and ripped his shirt. "Don't look. It will give you nightmares." A joke. I've survived 8 years in the apocalypse. Am I afraid of these lowly insects? His back was covered in dense bumps, with lentil-sized eggs wriggling under his skin, feasting on his flesh. I felt a chill. The eggs hatch in 12 hours, and this batch will consume a living person. This was the first time I truly detested insects. In my previous life, I never even stepped outside until the first snowfall. Eden, I'm dying. He turned his back to me. I know. I cursed. I thought when Eden came back this time, we could be together forever. I listened silently as he spoke. Eden, I've connected the water pipe, and there's a lot of food in the basement. When I'm gone, you'll have to learn to cook. When you die, I'll immediately move to the next place. Cedric sure talked a lot, from morning till night. After he brought back 2 buckets of water and reconnected the water pipe, he lay down at the front door, his face still hosting 2 blood-sucking mosquitoes. I loved his face the most. How could I tolerate it being ruined? I shooed away the mosquitoes and crouched beside him. He reached out his hand to pull me. He murmured the word Eden, but before he could finish, he dropped his hands and closed his eyes. Only 4 hours remained until the insect eggs were successfully hatched. Chapter 33. The first to evolve in the apocalypse were the flies, followed by other animals, small to large, weak to strong. These creatures came to be collectively known as evolved beasts. It wasn't until the first snowfall that a small portion of humanity began to mutate, each gaining various abilities. These individuals were called mutants, each ruled in their own right, establishing bases of various sizes in the post-apocalyptic world. By the 6th year, only 3 major bases remained. You see, even if the heavens sought to exterminate a species, hope was given and then extinguished, over and over, reigniting a tiny spark each time. It felt much like a cat playing with a mouse before the apocalypse, thoroughly enjoying the torment and the praise. Fear. Cedric, get up and cook. I nudged him. He climbed out of bed with a bewildered look, glanced at his hands, pristine as ever, in disbelief. Then he tightly wrapped his arms around my waist and muttered, I had a nightmare. I moved his hands away. It wasn't a dream. He ran to the mirror, shocked to see 2 massive skeletal protrusions and thin, wing-like appendages on his back. What are these? Besides the evolved beasts and mutants, there was another, even more dreadful entity, the symbiotes, living in symbiosis with animals, adopting their habits, occasionally going mad, rejected by all bases. If the balance was one strong and one weak, the stronger one dominated. If the animal side dominated, they were no different from the animal's instincts, merely inhabiting a human shell. In my past life, I encountered a black bear symbiote. Anyone who passed through its territory was devoured. The night before it was killed, I watched helplessly as a robust man tore open a living person's abdomen with his teeth, pulled out the intestines, and began to feast. It was an animal wearing human skin. In my previous life, Cedric stayed in a villa for 2 weeks before venturing out, coinciding with the life cycle of the flies. When I met him, he was already a well-known mutant at the base. I had heard his story. It roughly involved meeting our heroine Diana and Calvin on the way to the base, and over time, he fell for Diana and became utterly devoted to her. Thinking about the love he had for me that would one day be given to Diana made me sick to my stomach. However, I was curious whether Cedric had become a symbiote, still shouted and fought in the apocalypse, or remained a fly. I wondered if our clean and beautiful heroine could fall deeply in love with him again, as she had in the past. Chapter 34. Eden, don't come near me. Panic rarely seen crossed his usually calm face. I'm hungry, I said. Better hurry up and cook. If it weren't for the lack of food, I wouldn't have saved you. This was the first time I used the spiritual spring in the bracelet, truly a golden touch for the heroine to recruit troops and slaughter her way through enemies. In my previous life, I saw one of Diana's subordinates stung by a bee-evolved beast and begging for her life. She fed her a small sip of water, and in no time, she was healed. Also, Declan's superior was bitten by some insect outside the base, rolling on the ground in agony for 3 days and nights, eventually swelling up into a festering corpse, and she, leaning fearfully in Declan's arms, watched the man dying in agony, shedding 2 tears, making the men around her so heartbroken they hurried to comfort her and escort her back. The next day, Declan officially took over the base. The first thing was to arrange for me to go into the wilderness, with the bracelet on my wrist for life. I was curious to see if your path would still be so smooth. Stay in the house and wait for me. Cedric locked the door and left. I might as well have a dog that can cook, I thought. A monstrous body. He was afraid of hurting me, so he stopped clinging to me, but it wasn't long before he could fully control his body. Joyfully, he took my hand and walked out the door. His wings flapped, and the bugs around him followed suit. When he conveyed the thought of leaving, all the nearby bugs obeyed and flew away without attacking. Among his kind, he was one of the few symbiotic beings with advantages. Let's go outside and see. The sun was blindingly bright, and swarms of flies densely covered the corpses and street lamps in the distance. The ground was teeming with them, still frantically mating. Their time was almost up. I shook my head, declining. I don't want to go out today. Maybe tomorrow. Cedric never refused any of my requests. Tomorrow would mark the end of their life cycle, but no creature can calmly wait for death. The last frenzy before death would start tonight. 35. Many people survived, but resources were so scarce, humans had come to understand the habits of the flies. Venturing out silently in the deep of night, they wrapped themselves thickly, wearing goggles, clumsy like penguins. Wobbling in search of water and food, they moved slowly. Afraid to wake the sleeping flies, the water source Cedric found attracted many people. It was like a silent play. A stone fell into the water. Everyone paused their movements, breathing lightly. Fortunately, the bugs just fluttered their wings without further action. The water collectors hurried, one after another, as panic spread. Clang, a bucket full of water fell to the ground and rolled a few times. Buzzing intensively. They all woke up, then they pounced on this group of delicious lambs. 100, countless flies scrambled in the dark, forming a fast-moving cloud of man-eaters. This cloud began to strike windows, doors, any place that could lead inside. The homes where humans thought they were safe were overwhelmed by the insects. Cedric pulled my curtains again and carried me back to the room to block the door. His tone was full of self-reproach. Eden, I can't control them anymore. All those people are dead. The glass outside the living room curtains shattered in response, and I heard the loud and noisy screeching of bugs. A few bugs were also hitting the bedroom window, but he chased them away. How could you possibly save everyone? Cedric held me as if embedding me into his marrow. I'm afraid that one day. His words disappeared in his throat. Afraid of what? Death. I opened the door, looking at the finely shattered glass on the ground reflecting the colorful sunlight. A few people aimlessly wandered the streets, with no sight of flies on the ground. From somewhere, a loudspeaker urged everyone to leave the area. Heading to the base, I stretched lazily, greeted by another sunny day. The weather was truly delightful to the surviving humans. Congratulations! You've made it through the first wave of the apocalypse. Inside the house, Cedric packed up a heap of belongings and took my hand. Let's go. It was time to move on to the next place. 36. We left the crowd and drove towards the Tomorrow Ark base. There was another base established by the government not far from here, but it didn't survive the first snowfall. Cedric was a loyal dog, always putting me first, never asking why. Even about the wings he was most curious about. He never questioned me about what happened after he passed out. Better that way. I couldn't be bothered to make excuses. Many people died along the way. Insects had left the city, but the city was far from safe. Animals began to evolve. They moved in packs from the forests into the cities, becoming hunters. Human flesh was tender and defenseless, apart from attacks by evolved beasts. There were also betrayals among our own kind, murders over a sip of water, submission for a piece of bread, and countless individuals abandoning their families to survive alone. In this apocalypse, firearms forged the strong among humans, and then the strong ruthlessly preyed on the weak. By evening, we found a motel to rest in. It had been ravaged by a leopard, blood everywhere. A few men sat in the lobby, sharing the leopard's meat, their eyes fixed on me as we entered. Cedric, unflustered, stood in front, shielding me. Their exchange was uneasy, and Cedric pulled me to leave. Just then, two handsome young men supporting each other walked in. They looked somewhat alike. One man's shirt was torn at the waist, revealing a fierce gash. Uncle, Dean got scratched by that female leopard. What a coincidence. I paused, watching the men frantically tend to Dean's wound. TSK, how pitiful. I mean for the leopards, a tragic pair, one dead, one alive. Perhaps my gaze was too direct. Damien glanced at me curiously. Who are you? Just passers-by, looking to stay the night. Enemies wanting to kill you all. Hearing my request to stay, Cedric tightened his grip on my hand, looking deeply at me, but I was looking at Dean, concerned. Is the wound not too deep? Seeing Dean's pale, sweaty face, I let go of Cedric's hand. Cedric, don't we have some medicine in the car? Bring it out for Dean. How do you know my son's last name is Lee? The man called Uncle looked wary. I attended Dean's birthday party with my parents once, so I remember him. I mentioned my parents' names, and his expression relaxed slightly, motioning for us to sit. Cedric stealthily slipped a stolen handgun into my embrace. Wait for me. I then chatted casually with Damien, his face filled with worry, unsure of what was to come. I softly comforted him. You two will definitely make it to the base. In my past life, that's exactly what happened. All the people around you sacrificed themselves heroically to save you both. After enduring many hardships, you finally reached the Tomorrow Ark base and won the love of our great heroine, Diana, achieving great things, truly touching. I wiped a tear from my eye with my fingertip. You both found love, and then, because Diana kept coming to me in tears, she accused me of singling her out. To prove your grand love, one of you ruined my meridians, and the other left me, a now useless man, among strangers at the base. Eden, don't be sad. Since we're heading to the same destination, it will be safer to travel together from now on. Damien handed me a clean handkerchief. It's rare that Dean, even after bleeding so much, kept it hidden and didn't bring it out. Just as I was about to take it, another hand blocked his. With a cold face, Cedric threw the medicine at him, then picked me up and walked past them into the building. Sorry, my wife is tired, we're going to rest now. Such a petty man. Emphasizing the word wife. I peeked over his shoulder and gave a big smile to Damien, who was frozen in place. 37, Eden, why did you lie? You've never been to Cloud City. How could you know the Lee family? Cedric locked the doors and windows, then questioned me with my hands bound. A rabid dog biting, a jealous, mad rabid dog. His eyes were blood red, and the wings that emerged behind him fluttered uncontrollably. Is this a characteristic of a symbiotic body? Sitting on the bed, I turned my head away in disgust. Ever since he became a symbiotic, I've avoided any intimate gestures with him, even hugs and kisses. Cedric let go of me and retracted his wings, his eyes still a pitiful bright red. Eden, don't hate me, I know you like cleanliness the most. Later, when I find other mutated animals, I will definitely get rid of this thing. I remained silent, really annoying. Do you know what a symbiotic body is? Unless you die, and your body rots, leaving only bones. You will be controlled by the other half of the symbiotic body. You'll be bound to a disgusting bug for life. Eden, please talk to me. I won't ask anymore. Cedric knelt at my feet. Looking up, I was just an ordinary human pampered by him, while he possessed great power. I was charmed by that face, held up his face, and gently pecked his lips. My hair fell on his collarbone. His body trembled slightly, wanting to follow me up, but restrained by my hand gently resting on his shoulder. I'll kill them. Good, I'll do it. Don't dirty Eden's hands. My hand slid down to his chest, feeling his heart beating wholeheartedly for me. Don't rush. Once they're gone, it'll be your turn. 38. Under the moonlight, the buzzing insects flew into the small motel. People woke up screaming, trying to hide, but unable to resist, only to be devoured clean by these evolved beasts. Damien burst through the door, covered in scars, and fired a rocket at the swarm behind him, blasting an escape route. He had awakened his special abilities earlier than in his previous life. Eden, the insect plague is here again. Follow me this way. He suddenly paused, staring wide-eyed at Cedric standing next to me. More precisely, he was staring at the huge wings behind him. Monster, he muttered, then quickly fired a rocket, which Cedric easily deflected. The insects behind swiftly pounced. Damien's abilities clearly just awakened. After launching 2 more rockets, he was engulfed. Insects tainted with flames threw themselves at him one after another, forming a massive fireball. The air was filled with the smell of burning flesh. The corridor was covered in ashes, those of the insects and his own. I am still quite kind-hearted, not like him, who could torture so relentlessly. At the end of the corridor, a man walked in against the light. It was Dean. We bear no grudges, so why do this? He had lost all his relatives, and was overwhelmed with grief. I too wanted to know. We bore no grudges, so I cripple my meridians. Cedric raised his pistol at Dean's head, but he didn't dodge. Clearly resigned to death, a young insect clung to the wound on his waist. I pulled Cedric away, saying lightly, no need to waste bullets. He's already been parasitized by the eggs. Without the spirit spring in the bracelet, there would never be another case of symbiosis with the flies. I caught up on some sleep in the car while Cedric drove towards the base. As the sun set, I leaned on the window and watched a flock of large birds carrying goats fly by. Eden, are you happy now? Happy? How could I not be? Suddenly, I regretted letting them die so easily. What should I do? But I no longer felt like tormenting them. How long until we reach the base? I didn't answer him, lazily squinting my eyes and stretching out my hand to feel the breeze. If the gas station ahead still has fuel, it'll only take 2 more days. He watched me through the rearview mirror, and after a long silence, he spoke again. Eden, no matter what you plan to do, I'll always stand by your side. His voice was soft, caught in the incoming wind, and carried away by it. How touching. I felt moved. Did you say the same thing to Diana in your past life? It makes me want to vomit. Cedric killed 2 reckless robbers. He rarely kills, but those 2 were particularly foul-mouthed. He covered my ears and comforted me, saying, we'll be safe once we reach the base. Okay. I barely spoke to him during the journey, not bothering with him. Receiving my response, he continued talking about what we needed at the base, wanting me to stay safely at home every day until he returned, until the apocalypse was over. Perhaps then we could have 2 more children. His eyes were full of hope for the future. I stared at his face, as handsome as ever. Even in these apocalyptic times, he managed to keep himself well-groomed. Every meeting with him meant one less in the future. Sorry, but I never planned to enter the base with you. As we got closer to the base, the human conflicts intensified. Nobody wanted to fall just before dawn. Along the way, I casually saved someone we were supposed to meet only 4 years later, now only 16. His dimpled smile was as adorable as ever, calling me sister just like in the past. His name was Carson, my little fool. With him around, my smiles became more frequent. At the gas station, we encountered a squad from the base on a mission. The leader told us that the 1,000-year-old ginkgo tree I had chopped down had finally turned into a demon. They planned to subdue it while it was still weak, otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get the oil and other resources from the other side. He invited Cedric to join them, promising generous points for everyone who participated in subduing the demon tree. Winter was approaching, and without the resources to get through it, it will be freezing cold and many will perish. Cedric wants to go, but I don't, because in my past life, Carson died under that cursed tree. The boss said that he would have me and Carson stand aside in a safe spot as backup, and we would still earn points. Carson was moved and spent the whole night trying to convince me he had just been robbed and was penniless, relying on us for food, without supplies, even if we reached the base. Survival wasn't guaranteed. I had planned to deal with Cedric at the gas station, but now, with the delay and so many people around, it wasn't the right moment to act. I had no choice but to agree. The temple was entwined with the roots of this ginkgo tree, and the monks had long vanished without a trace. The tree had grown incredibly fast. It had been almost 2 months since I last cut it, and now it had shot up 100 yards. Its branches lush with leaves and the soil around its roots rich. Fresh blood splattered on the nearby rocks, not yet dried. The first snow was coming soon, and the cursed tree was preparing to hunt for its next evolution. I knew that its roots would begin to evolve after the first snowfall, leaving no living creature in its path. At the onset of the apocalypse, this tree wasn't so formidable, but it was still better to be cautious. I just glanced once and pulled Carson to a higher spot farther away to quietly watch their moves. The naive one beside me stood at the forefront, eagerly watching, ready to jump into action. If it weren't for me holding him back, he would have rushed forward long ago. The trunk was new, and as the boss swung his axe, the cursed tree began to shake. It was indeed evolving and had gained consciousness. Feeling pain, the boss continued to chop, quickly cutting through half of it. The tree shook more violently, rooted in the soil and unable to move, helplessly watching as its body was severed. The vibrant green ginkgo leaves quickly turned to scorched yellow, falling from the branches to the ground, covering the enemies at the tree's base. Unfortunately, the rounded ginkgo leaves were not sharp like ordinary leaves and couldn't be used as weapons. Cedric poured gasoline on the tree trunk and set it on fire. A loud noise came from below. This tree has really become a spirit. It even screams when killed. People marveled, not expecting the task to be completed so easily. They were about to leave when suddenly the ground shook violently. Millions of roots of varying thickness burst through the soil like serpents in the sky, swiftly wrapping around the unsuspecting people. I couldn't keep my footing, and Carson, who was in front of me, fell onto the grass below. A root swung towards him, and I quickly jumped down to cut it off, then looked up briefly before quickly taking Carson and fleeing. This tree had evolved much sooner than expected. Ordinary people couldn't withstand its attacks, and even the boss was swept away after cutting only 2 roots. Cedric reluctantly revealed his wings, a look of urgency on his face as he flew towards me. Countless roots chased after us. With my current speed, I could escape alone, but carrying Carson slowed me down. But there was no way I could abandon him. Eden, Cedric flew to my side, trying to pick me up. I mercilessly pushed him into the ancient tree's roots. If you love me, then die for me. He cut off the root that bound him and flew towards me again. More roots wrapped around his body, crushing his wings. Eden. His voice was heart-wrenching as the cursed tree dragged him into the soil. Seeing Cedric swallowed by the demonic tree, I didn't dare to linger. I quickly grabbed Carson and fled. We ran a great distance, not stopping until there was not a single sapling in sight. I found a relatively safe place to tend to the injured Carson, and, unable to resist fatigue any longer, I fell into a deep sleep. This time, I managed to protect my dear fool, Eden. Eden, who is calling me, a man whispered beside me. Eden, I love you. Then I saw Cedric flying toward me. But just as I reached out, he was entangled by the roots of the demonic tree and slowly pulled away from me. Eden, a roaring sound jolted me awake. Carson was breathing steadily beside me. I pulled the blanket that was kicked aside over him to keep him warm. Sitting up for a long time, sleep eluded me. I wiped away the tears that had fallen on my face without my noticing, ran to the door, and yelled in the direction of the demonic tree, "Who needs your love? I never loved you. From the first day I saw you again, I was just using you, tormenting you. Cedric, you disgust me. Cedric, may you remain frozen in the moment you loved me most." The next day, I took my dear fool to the base. Outside the base, I encountered a girl holding a knife. It was mine, the knife that had been with me for 7 long years in my previous life. I couldn't help but show my excitement. "How do you have this knife?" "My brother gave it to me." A stranger shielded her and looked at me with displeasure. "Miss, you must be mistaken. This knife was specially made to order, and there is definitely not a second one like it in the world." After he spoke, he walked off in the direction we had come from. It wasn't him, not that person. In this life, I've met everyone I encountered in my past life early, except him. His face was always covered with a black cloth. Unrecognizable, but he always had a unique faint scent of herbs. Different from the bloody smell of most people post-apocalypse. I had only seen him twice, I don't know his name, and he rarely spoke to me. The first time we met, he gave me water when I was nearly dying of thirst, handed me a knife for self-defense, and taught me some magical incantations. Without any special abilities, I relied on that knife to survive. Diana stole my belongings and played the victim, making others think I was bullying her. After Cedric broke my right hand, it became clumsy to wield the knife with my left, but I could still defend myself in the wilderness, until Dean destroyed my meridians, making me completely incapable of leaving the base and reducing me to a cripple. I eked out an existence until an aberrant forcefully took the knife from me. I became a pariah, despised and trampled upon by everyone. The winters were so cold, with no clothes. I had to strip them from the dead. I can't remember how long it had been since I last ate. As more and more people around me fell, with the last bit of my strength, I bit into the warm flesh. I had to live, I had to survive. Diana was wearing a white robe, fluttering like a fairy in the snowy weather. Her crying was melodious, like that of a nightingale. Her men surrounded her, whispering consolations. She turned and saw me gnawing on a corpse, trembling with fear as she burrowed into Damien's arms. Dean, jealous, grabbed my hair and dragged me to the outer wall of the base, then kicked me off. As I fell, I stared blankly at the blue-gray sky. Why is fate so cruel? I just wanted to survive. I just wanted to live. What did I do wrong? I thought that day was going to be the end of my life, but I woke up again. It was that man who saved me. He healed my wounds, told me not to compete with Diana, and insisted that I go with him to the northern base. What was I competing with Diana for? I agreed, asking if tomorrow would be possible. He promised to come and take me away at noon the next day. Early the next morning, I got up, disguised myself, overcame many obstacles, and made my way to Diana's estate at the center of the base. In winter, we ordinary people had no food. We were dying of hunger and cold, while she had a vast land just for planting flowers. When I arrived, she was watering her flowers with the spirit spring water from her bracelet. The flowers were blooming profusely, making her look even more strikingly beautiful. I clenched the sword in my hand, which the man from last night had given me for self-defense. If fate was unjust, then I would seek justice for myself. I thrust the sword through her heart, then in her fearful gaze, I took the bracelet from her wrist and smashed it. I couldn't defeat her men. I never thought I'd make it out alive, so I simply slit my own throat. I just hoped that man wouldn't look for me. I still couldn't survive the winter. I fell to the ground and closed my eyes forever. I exhaled a breath, the white mist quickly dispersing in front of me, with droplets condensing on the window. The weather was getting colder. On the third evening after I settled Carson at the base, the first snow began to fall. I poured 2 cups of spirit spring water, one for him and one for myself. The next day, Carson happily told me he had awakened his special ability. The base called all those with abilities to register in the hall, where I saw Diana again. Her outfit was almost the same as in my previous life when it snowed, the same ethereal white robe and a white veil, without the bracelet's spirit spring. The scars on her face had not healed, but seeing her cuddle up to a man in military uniform, with eyes full of tenderness, she was still as captivating as before. Although I had killed her other 3 men, it was strange to see Calvin not by her side. Wasn't he always Diana's most loyal follower, listening to the people around? Diana was referred to as the seer in the base, enjoying people's adoration. Originally, Declan came to my house because he discovered I was a prophet, but these details don't matter anymore. The higher you climb on me, the harder I'll let you fall. I smiled faintly and met her gaze, then watched her immediately shiver and hide behind Declan. Declan glared at me and asked, "Is it her?" Diana nodded timidly, her eyes red like a rabbit's. Declan strode towards me. "Hand over the bracelet you stole." I raised my hand, asking him, "This one, return the bracelet to Diana, and I might spare your life." I stole it. I pulled a receipt for the bracelet out of my bag and unfolded it for him to see. "Look carefully, it's in my name." Declan obviously didn't expect that after all this time in the apocalypse, through all the hardships, I would still have the receipt for the bracelet. Frustrated and embarrassed, he tried to grab it from me but was pushed away by Carson. Carson stood in front of me. "What are you doing? You think because you're an official you can rob us ordinary folk?" Declan's expression changed. "A person with abilities." I noticed his reference. It seems many things have changed in this life. They didn't call them people with abilities in my previous life. Someone came to defuse the situation. asking us to register our abilities. Seeing that he couldn't successfully retrieve the bracelet, Diana quietly cried and tugged at him to leave. Carson said his evolution was strength. After registering, the administrator asked about my special ability. I replied leisurely, "I'm just accompanying him. I haven't awakened any special abilities." The day after Carson left for a mission, the base assigned me a mandatory task to collect herbs in the wilderness. There were many people with me, including Diana and Declan. I intentionally strayed from the group, heading deeper into the mountainous area filled with large, hard rocks. Declan pointed a gun at me from behind. I turned around and quietly observed Diana's distorted face. She wasn't wearing a veil, and a long scar ran across her entire face. She wanted to take back the bracelet and also wanted my life. Calmly, I took off the bracelet and smiled. "Is this bracelet really that important? Go ahead and shoot. Let's see if your gun is faster, or if I can smash this first." I pretended to smash the bracelet. Diana, desperate, rushed over to snatch it, and I took her hostage. "Such foolishness is incurable," she whispered. "I know you're kind-hearted and won't kill me. Just give me a cup of the spirit spring water to heal my face, and I'll make him let you go. Who gave you such confidence?" I ignored her and signaled to an anxious Declan to throw his gun over. "Don't hurt Diana, or I won't let you go," he said. He threw his gun at my feet and stayed put, watching my every move. We locked eyes, a moment of deep emotional connection. As I bent to pick up the gun, he quickly drew another from behind. Bang! I moved swiftly beside him, disarmed his wrist, and stepped on his face. His voice was filled with terror. "I thought you didn't have any special abilities." "I didn't yesterday, but I just got them today." I shot him in the thigh, and he clutched his wound in agony, his face pale. Soon passing out, Diana stumbled over, pleading desperately for a cup of the spirit spring water. "How did you know there was spirit spring water in the bracelet? Tell me, and I'll give it to you." Seeing her now devoid of any dignity, I felt disdainful, recalling how this thing had fooled me completely in my past life. Last life, she was a deceptive damsel. Could it be that changing the time she met Declan turned her foolish? Diana choked up, after waiting a while and knowing she wouldn't speak. I started to leave, but she grabbed my pant leg. I'll tell you, I've been transported into this book. This world is from a post-apocalyptic novel. Ridiculous. It's true. Afraid I would leave. She spilled everything. You are the real protagonist of this world, and the bracelet is your golden touch. Calvin, Declan, they are all meant to be in your harem. Please, just give me the spirit spring water. I don't want to compete with you for anything. I just want to go home. I can't stand this place anymore. A hypocritical liar, claiming she doesn't want to compete, yet she takes everything in the end. Oh, the irony. I thought she was the heroine, but it turns out I am a heroine who has turned the tables. You want to go home, but what about me? I just want to survive. The pain you're experiencing now doesn't even compare to a fraction of what you put me through in our past lives. Can't handle it. I poured a cup of the spirit spring, then deliberately spilled most of it on a rock. Diana, desperate and devoid of any grace, licked the rock as the water quickly vanished. I crouched down and handed her the remaining half cup. "I really want to see whether this cup of spring water will heal Declan's wounds or your face." Diana shivered as she held a half cup of spring water, sitting down in front of the unconscious Declan, silently shedding tears. She placed the cup against Declan's lips, hesitated for a long time before drinking the water herself, threw the cup behind her, and hugged Declan, saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't blame me. I'll take you back to the base." Quite the spectacle. Declan has protected you for so long. Can you really bear to watch him die? I stood by, arms crossed, sarcastically mocking. Diana murmured an explanation. "No, he won't die. He's also a protagonist." "Is that so?" "Your so-called protagonist. I've already killed 3 of them." Hearing disturbances from afar, I knew the climax of the drama was upon us. This place was the territory of the black bear symbiote in the last life. It seems it's here in this life too. I quickly dodged behind a large tree. Diana also spotted the abnormal, burly men walking on all fours, and unable to drag Declan, she climbed up the tree in desperation, mimicking my actions. Truly someone who knows the plot. The man stopped beside Declan, sniffing around him and then circling a few times before tearing his clothes and slicing open his abdomen. Declan woke up in excruciating pain, staring straight up at Diana, who covered her mouth in disbelief, shock, and tears. Diana witnessed the protagonist she claimed would not die being eaten alive by the bear, leaving only his hands and head. Her support was gone forever. 43. I returned to the base with the main force and then began to contribute to the construction of the base. becoming its second in command, and pouring the spirit spring water into the base as well. As more people developed special abilities, the base expanded and interactions with other bases grew more frequent. 2 years later, I met an acquaintance at the entrance of the base. "You're still alive," I greeted him. Calvin had a buzz cut and looked very energetic. "Eden, I finally see you again." He seemed thrilled, pulling me to a less crowded area. I didn't refuse. After all, he was still alive. "Wasn't he? You haven't run into Diana, have you?" His question was odd, and I withdrew my hand with a sneer. "Missing her? Why didn't you follow her?" Diana hadn't returned to the base in 2 years, as if she had vanished, but I knew she wasn't dead. Calvin glanced around cautiously, then said, "There's something strange about her, Eden. After all these years, you wouldn't believe me even if I spoke honestly. I love you, but I can't help being drawn to Diana, helping her as if under a spell." "It's not what I intended," he spoke softly. "The time you beat me half to death and locked me in the basement, I was conscious. I'm not blaming you. I've moved on." I clearly heard Diana calling something a system. The clearest thing I heard was, "If I can't get the bracelet, my charm skill won't upgrade." And to think this Calvin strategy didn't work at all. He looked at me. I put down my gun. "Go on." Later, she told the system to switch to strategizing for Declan, using my favorability to attract Declan. After I recovered, I left the military and joined this base. "Eden, I owe you an apology." "I'm sorry." Calvin stood up and bowed deeply at 90 degrees. "You can go now." I locked myself in my room for a whole week until Carson broke the lock on the door, saying the base was surrounded by evolved beasts, the woman sitting atop the king of beasts. "It appears that Diana has shockingly allied herself with beasts. I must have made a mistake. Even if I were to kill Dean Damien, or even Declan, who was deeply in love with Diana, she would remain unharmed. My error was absurd. Hand over Eden." Her voice was full of emotion, brimming with hatred and jealousy. Carson organized the psychics to stand ready on the wall, prepared to attack at any moment. I ordered them to open the gates of the base. I needed to go outside. They resisted, rushing forward in their eagerness. The evolved beasts now had crystal cores in their heads, which were essential for upgrading their powers. However, the mutants I had created were somewhat excessive, making the scene rather bloody. Initially, the mutants were overpowering the evolved beasts, but then a group of high-level evolved birds arrived, turning the humans and beasts on the ground into their prey. Diana escaped on a lion, protected by a few animal symbionts. I followed her trail, only showing myself when they had run far, and began to rest. She lay scarcely clothed among 4 men, which was truly disgusting. "Is this the charm skill the system granted you? You're really not picky." She hastily adjusted her scant clothing, her voice sharp. Kill her for me." The animal symbionts lunged at me, but I swiftly dodged and retreated. They caught up to me, and just as their claws were about to tear through my shoulder, I teleported next to Diana. "This expression of yours, it's as if I'm responsible for your current state." I snapped her neck, her eyes widening bizarrely with a flash of electronic light, which quickly disappeared. I guess that was her system. I chose a direction and ran. The farther from the base, the better. After her death, those loyal animal symbionts she had summoned were still after me, relentless in their pursuit. Caught off guard, one symbiont shredded my arm. Using my last strength, I teleported twice, finally spotting a grand ginkgo tree. Dragging my wounded body, I walked towards it slowly, calmly. I arrived. Ahead, the roots of a sinister tree emerged from the soil, swiftly extending towards me, with the symbionts relentlessly pursuing from behind. This was it. My revenge was complete. In this life, I only regretted not meeting the person from my past life who had always helped me, but otherwise, I had fulfilled my desires. I closed my eyes, listening to the rustling of the wind, the symbionts and the tree's roots entangled, attacking each other wildly. Perhaps because I offered no resistance, only a thin root coiled around my ankle, the pursuing symbionts became nourishment for the sinister tree. A thick root wrapped around me, gently placing me under a towering ginkgo tree covered in leaves, then released me and burrowed into the soil, only the thin root at my ankle tightly coiled around. As if fearing that its reserve food, might escape, I lay curled up quietly on the thick layer of ginkgo leaves, with no desire to struggle. In a daze, I seemed to hear someone calling me, "Eden, I love you." The pain was unbearable, worse even than my torn arm. As my consciousness faded, I began to recount what happened after my rebirth. "Cedric, if only I had killed you right after my rebirth, instead of toying with you, only to end up trapping myself. I deliberately spilled the water, sending you to your death. But in the end, I softened, wanting to give you a few more days to live." Cough. "I didn't mind your dirtiness. I intentionally didn't speak to you on our way to the base, because I was afraid I'd soften again. You were so obedient. When I told you to kill the Lee family, you did it without hesitation. You didn't understand why I wanted them dead. You don't know why I want to kill you. Oh, It hurts so much. Cedric, if only you could love me forever. But you fell in love with Diana, you broke my wrist, turned me into a cripple, and left me to be bullied by Dean and the others. That's why I ended your lives in this lifetime. I burst into laughter, laughing so hard that my lungs and chest ached. But Calvin told me that your love for Diana was controlled by the system. It was all because of her. Now she's dead, and I'm about to die too. You've never seen our home at the base. I arranged it just as you described, with warm, goose yellow tones. For pillows, too big and too small, and a pair of wings hung on the wall as a specimen. My movements became fierce. As the roots slowly climbed up my legs to my face, I let my hand drop to the side. It's okay, we'll be meeting soon. Tiny roots burrowed into my skull, a sharp pain bringing forth a new memory in my mind, a memory that belonged to Cedric, 45, after I pushed Cedric away. He was engulfed deep into the trunk by a demonic tree, and everyone else died, since he was a symbiote. Although his body was corroded by the tree's digestive juices down to the bones, he could still be conscious as long as his head was intact, until another group came to chop the tree down and were killed by the demonic tree, which gathered their bodies deep inside as reserve food. The girl with the knife, who I had met just once outside the base, tried to save that man, and resolutely plunged her knife, which could slice through iron, into the heart of the demonic tree. Only to be killed as the frenzied tree corroded her. The demonic tree released him, and he drank its green blood, crawling into its heart. When the first snow fell, Cedric merged with the demonic tree, swallowed its consciousness, but returned to his previous life, transformed back. There was only him at home, without me. Fearing that two of him in the world would cause chaos, he masked himself and came to my house, rescuing me, who was barely alive in the villa. I told him how I was betrayed by my boyfriend, how the other woman not only took the bracelet but also took all the survival supplies. His form was unstable, constantly at risk of being pulled back into the tree. Despite his reluctance, he hastily left resources for me, along with the cultivation secrets passed down from the demonic tree and the knife from the girl in that lifetime. In that life, he was a tree, desperately growing to break away from his plant nature, but unable to leave. He struggled against the consciousness of the demonic tree, gradually falling into slumber until Carson and I came hunting near his territory and woke him. He saw Colton stab my eye, and started to extend his roots desperately towards them. The group was shocked, tried to run but couldn't escape his roots. As the roots were about to catch Colton dragged me in front to block, and Carson, seeing this, desperately pushed me away to escape, then got entangled with Colton by the roots. Even the strongest plant can never escape the bonds of the earth. I ran desperately. He wanted to keep me, but the roots reached their limit and couldn't move forward any further, helplessly watching as I walked away, badly injured. He waited 2 years, and finally, it snowed again. This time, he succeeded. He defeated the consciousness of the demonic tree and transformed a second time. He wanted to be by my side as a human, but he found that another him was strangely in love with Diana, and was always against me. He dared not tell me he was Cedric. He fed me his blood, healed my wounds, and said he would take me to another base. Because his form was again unstable due to injuries, he had to leave first, promising to come take me away tomorrow. He thought that this time, after all the hardships, we had finally come together. Filled with joy, he arrived at the base, only to find my cold, skeletal remains hanging on the wall of the base. He was just one step away, only one step. Cedric's body was filled with violent emotions. The demonic tree's consciousness took over, and he slaughtered everyone at the base, gathering my bones close to his heart. The memories shown to me by the demonic tree abruptly ended there. The person who saved me in a past life turned out to be Cedric from another parallel universe, who endured immense suffering and desperately tried to reach me, and in this life, I personally killed Cedric, who loved me with all his heart. He never changed his feelings. The roots of the demonic tree gently supported me as I cried my heart out. It must have been so painful when he was alive and his body was slowly corroded by the tree. A tender branch poked my forehead, transmitting to me another vision. Cedric, carrying me to the bedroom, said, "I will protect Eden for a lifetime, whether in this life or the last." Cedric is the only plant symbiote in this world. He first merged with insects, his ability being insect resonance, which allowed him to transmit his commands. After merging with the demonic tree, this ability remained and enabled him to convey his memories to me through the roots. The ginkgo tree, just like in the past life, was located in a forbidden zone, but in this life, the zone included me. Cedric built a small house for me under the ginkgo tree with his roots, and I settled down there, occasionally returning to the base. I left my bracelet to Carson, who now took over my position. Carson always urged me to stay, always worried about the demonic tree going mad. "He won't," I said, "because he is the love of my life whom I will spend my life with." I will stay with him until he transforms again. 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, I can wait. 3 years later, everything at the base was on track. Humanity's development was rapid, adapting to the post-apocalyptic world, and technology had made significant breakthroughs. Humanity returned to its pre-apocalyptic glory, destroying most of the evolved beasts. In this life, the plants mutated very little. In fact, only one ginkgo tree developed consciousness, but it was devoured by Cedric. 2 years later, on a day when heavy snow was falling, I had just left the base when I saw him, his lean silhouette, and the faint scent of grass and trees. Just like in the past life, he turned around and reached out his hand to me. I smiled and took his hand. This day was the day Cedric and I in a past life had agreed he would come to fetch me. My life has been deeply hurt twice. The first time, my lover pushed me towards death with her own hands. I called out her name loudly, but she coldly left with another man, decisively not even turning her head back. This was one of only 2 instances where things were beyond my control since becoming a symbiote. The last time was at my home, where the swarm of insects outside went out of control and killed many people. I held Eden tight, murmuring that I was afraid that one day, but I never finished that sentence. I was afraid that one day we too would part, but this unspoken fear eventually became a cruel reality. The outside world is so dangerous, but fortunately, I evolved before ordinary people. Although the wings behind me are ugly, they are surprisingly strong, making my journey to the base smooth. I had even planned how Eden and I would live at the base, how we would decorate our little home. Until this moment, my wings, along with the foolish thoughts in my head, were shattered by the demonic tree. But they could not outweigh the 1 in a million pain in my heart when I saw her leaving. Does she despise me for mistakenly becoming an insect symbiote? Eden loves cleanliness. Despite living symbiotically with such a disgusting thing, I see a hidden hatred in her eyes beyond the disgust. Sometimes I curse how sensitive our shared perception is. Eden hates me, and this realization saddens me. I don't know why she harbors this hatred. All I can do is watch as she becomes more indifferent towards me, no matter what I say or do. She remains aloof as if ready to leave me at any moment. Eden has many secrets. I suspect her reasons contributed to my becoming a symbiote, but she doesn't talk about it, so I don't ask. But why does she know the Lee family, and why does she harbor such intense hatred towards them? The girl who used to secretly free the rabbits bought by the cook now tells me she wants to kill someone. Still, I ended up killing them myself. I didn't want Eden to get her hands dirty. It was enough for her to stand by my side, clean and uninvolved. As I led her past the dying Dean, her gaze shifted from Dean to me. It was only then that I started to panic, because the way she looked at me was no different from the way she looked at the Lee family. Until the moment of my death, I never understood why my lover hated me. We were childhood sweethearts. I indulged and favored her, doing everything to protect her. Despite all I did, she never accepted my love. The second time, I struggled immensely to return to her side, only for her to break her promise and leave alone for the underworld. By a twist of fate, I returned to that lifetime. In that world, Eden had never sought out Cedric, and it was here that our destinies diverged. In that lifetime, I accessed the memories of those consumed by the demonic tree and gradually pieced together the origins of my lover's hatred. In that life, Cedric hurt her for someone else, but Eden, I am not him. Even if you kill me for someone else, I have never harbored any hatred towards you. I equally despise everyone who hurts you. Fiercely competing with the demonic tree's consciousness, and ultimately returning in physical form, I caught you, Eden. I healed her wounds with my heart's blood, but didn't restore her meridians, selfishly hoping we could interact as we had in our previous lives. I cautiously asked, Eden, shall we go to another base together? She smiled and answered, yes. Can we go tomorrow? I suppressed my excitement and agreed, losing so much heart's blood that I almost couldn't resist the demonic tree's consciousness, and had to hastily say goodbye. A day's delay didn't matter. We would have plenty of time. We would start a new life at another base. I could hunt like the mutants of the base, and Eden could freely do what she liked within the base. A bright future awaited us both, until I saw the cold skeleton hanging outside the base, its clothing stained dark red with fresh blood dripping drop by drop onto my heart, shattering my dreams. You, who loved cleanliness and feared pain so much, I fed her all of my heart's blood, even cut the flesh from my body, but still couldn't mend the large hole in her neck, helplessly watching her turn to dust, to love, but not be loved in return, to part in life and death, missing by just one move. Eden. Eden, I'm here. What's wrong? Did you have a nightmare again? I opened my eyes to search, and there she was, my lover wrapped in a red blanket, sitting up and looking at me worriedly, her soft and warm fingertips gently wiping the tears from the corners of my eyes. I tightly grasped her hand, greedily gazing at her lively and spirited face. My Eden, right here beside me. Is it because it's too cold here? Not suitable for the tree to grow. Let's head back after watching the aurora. she suggested. I shook my head. I'll go wherever you want to go. It's been 4 years since we left. It's time to check back at the base. I'll listen to my wife. I embraced her, savoring the cozy warmth. Eden seemed resigned, although I didn't want to see that scoundrel who tried to steal my wife. The current success of the Tomorrow Ark base owed much to Eden. It was only right for her to return. The aurora appeared, and I took her hand and walked out of the tent, watching her lively, childlike smile. I briefly let go of the nightmares of another life. Why are you looking at me? You were the one who insisted on seeing the aurora. You're beautiful. She snuggled into my arms, and as I followed her gaze across the snow-covered fields and the star-filled sky, a bright, magical aurora tore through the mysterious purple-gray heavens. In Western mythology, there's a legend that if two people in love see the northern lights at the same time, they are destined to be together and will find eternal love. Eden turned to look at me and slowly said, "You seem to know a lot. Diana told me this world is like a novel. Do you think you are my destined one?" "I'm certain of it. So sure. In our last life, you ran off with her." "Eden, I am me. He is not me." Eden turned back to the horizon and after a long pause said, "Cedric, this life and the last have changed drastically. Except for our complicated entanglements. Everyone else is innocent. Dean and the others didn't harm me in this life, yet I killed them out of hatred. Eden, the millions of humans who survived because of you in this life far outnumber those in the last. I killed those people, and I will bear any resentment they might hold. No, a mistake is a mistake. If there's another life, I'll repay it then I will share that burden with you." Eden smiled and agreed, then tilted her head and suddenly said, "If this really were a novel, wouldn't this be the perfect ending? The atmosphere's so good. Shouldn't we kiss?" She tiptoed and kissed me, and I bent down to embrace her as we stood under the northern lights, immersed in what she named the grand finale of a kiss. But I think this story isn't over yet. I returned to the Tomorrow Ark base with Eden. Carson, anxious and eager, stood at the entrance and ran towards us from afar, expressing his longing for Eden. I stood in front of him, blocking his view, his face wary as he asked, "What are you here for?" "To get married," I replied expressionlessly and then walked into the base with Eden. It was my first time entering the home I shared with Eden. It was clean and cozy. A framed pair of wings had fallen behind the door. I picked it up. Eden, embarrassed, snatched it away. I teased her as I followed. "Didn't you find wings disgusting before? Why keep a pair in the room?" She didn't answer, so I asked again, "When did Eden fall in love with me?" Eden threw a pillow at me, its pattern very similar to the ones we had at home, and the entire room's decor resembled our previous residence. All those changes I mentioned wanting to make in the car, the curtains I wanted to replace, she had remembered them all. I embraced this contradictory woman and kissed her. There was a knock at the door. I helped Eden tidy her disheveled clothes and opened the door to find Carson standing outside. I closed the door. In a foul mood, the door slammed loudly. "Cedric, open the door. I'm looking for my sister." Eden came out, kissed me on the cheek, and ruffled my hair, which calmed me down a bit. Carson walked a distance with my wife before whispering, "Sis, are you really going to marry him? He's like a capricious monster. I'm truly afraid he might lose it and devour you." "Who's the monster?" My fur bristled again. Eden knocked on his head and chuckled. "Even if he wanted to eat me, could you stop him?" Watching Carson's indignant face, Eden added, "Come on, you'll have to call him brother-in-law. Don't always be at odds with him, especially since you can't beat him." If it weren't for Eden's sake, I would have turned Carson into my nourishment long ago, just like I did in another life. Carson stubbornly nodded his head after some resistance. Eden and I had our wedding, making it known throughout the base. Carson only called me brother-in-law after extracting 2 rare evolutionary beast cores as a wedding gift from me. His voice was as faint as a fly's, and his expression was awkward, but I was quite pleased. I wanted everyone to know that Eden was mine. On our wedding night, as Eden and I lay in bed, I said, "What if I can't resist the demonic tree's consciousness and go mad again?" Eden wriggled out of my embrace and playfully hit me. "You've been eavesdropping again." I held her hand earnestly. "I'm serious." She looked at me for a long time. "If that day really comes, then I'll be with you." I covered her mouth before she could finish. "Actually, I have an idea. You could keep me tethered." Eden looked puzzled. "With what?" I leaned closer and whispered in her ear, "Perhaps, by having a child or something."